All right. Okay.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another Atelier live stream workshop. I'm Michael Klein, and this is Richard Kochenash. Before I get into too much about the workshop and how this whole idea came about, the Impressionist and academic tradition, I would like to basically just kind of go over our materials and let Rick explain what he's doing, because I know he likes to jump into it once we kind of have the bouquet up. So if you could just kind of maybe start with your palette, mention maybe your brushes, canvas, the simple stuff, and then
Okay, yeah.
and then as you start to paint, then I'll talk about the workshop idea and how we met and all that.
Yeah, I have some new addition to my palette, these gray colors, but essentially the palette runs from the red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet, kind of the rainbow, and I have it set up so that the colors are complementary to each other across, and they go to the neutral towards the center. And then I'm working with these colors. I'll be talking about them later on. These colors here, these neutral 12 shades of gray. I'll be talking probably a lot about that. That's primarily what I've been using lately in my paintings here. I have these long handled brushes, which are excellent for pointing and for painting. I like them a lot. I've gone to that because I tend to stand back from my canvas when I'm painting. And I used to always, I work sight size, so whatever size it appears, that's what I'm transferring over to my canvas here. And I find that I always would walk back to a point and then walk forward and walk back and forth. And now that I'm in my 60s, I find I can easily lunge is easier than walking, which I've been doing. And I find it really works well to be able to stand back from the canvas and then to be able to follow with my eye and with my hand at the same time. So I really like these new long handle brushes here. Another new addition I have are these Princeton, this way? Yeah. Princeton Catalyst. And I don't know what kind of squeegee. In fact, I started with the word squeegee and I went to wedge. As far as I use them primarily to remove paint, and I'll be showing that. And now I use them for not only removing paint, but for applying paint. And they work really well for, especially flower painting, because what you do is you have all the petals, and then you have all that leaves, and it's really good for just articulating different foliage. You put a bunch of paint down there, and then you just kind of take this, and I'll show that, and it just makes these patterns and leaf patterns, which is just really believable and beautiful. So anyway, how
about the surface you're painting on?
Oh, and this is just a linen panel, Centurion oil primed panel.
Great. All right, excellent. So while I'm kind of explaining how this idea came about, feel free to jump in and start painting.
Sure.
And
just start painting?
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm working 3 days on it. So so Rick's going to be doing a one-day painting for the first 2 days, and then he'll decide on Sunday how he wants to proceed, if he wants to do another fresh start or if he wants to work back into one of them. And I'll be doing a similar approach to what I've taught in the past, which is a 3-day approach, and kind of growing along and evolving with what the bouquet is doing. So this will be a really great treat for the audience. You guys are welcome to, you can see on the website, underneath the video, there's the materials list, and there's a form to submit questions. So we'll be taking questions from you. That's one of the advantages to this workshop, is to join us live and interact with us. So please don't be shy and submit any questions you want. Below that are the reference images of what we're working. We're working from life, obviously, but the images are there for you to download and reference as we paint. So All right, so basically this idea, I had been teaching workshops for a long time, and I would always open it up saying that I had a background in Minnesota and I had a background in New York, and there were two different ideologies, two different philosophies on how to approach a painting. And the more I thought about it and the more it kind of sunk in, I realized how big of an influence Rick was in my development early on. So Rick was one of my first teachers when I was 19. We were in Minnesota, in Burnsville. It's a suburb of Minneapolis. It was a school called the Minnesota River School of Fine Art, and Rick was one of the full-time instructors there. The founder, Patricia Jurdy, she was very interested in allowing us to do whatever we wanted, rather than painting first-year students painting casts, second-year students painting still life, etc. She wanted everyone to jump into it. So literally, my first influence to painting was a lot of Rick's ideas and concepts about color, how color functions on a spectrum, the ideas of brushwork, all that stuff. So that really stuck with me throughout my career. And as I got older, I started to kind of realize that it was such a profound influence. And I started showing people images of Rick's work during workshops, and they're like, oh my gosh, that's super similar to what you do. And so I thought this would be really fun to kind of pay respect to you and what you've taught me, and allow you to be able to...
Much appreciated.
Yeah. So that was the history behind it. We'll talk more about kind of, as we talk, it'll become apparent, I think, the differences between kind of more of an impressionist sentiment and an academic approach. So I won't go too into it, but that's the foundation of the idea of this class. So.
Oh, nice. I was going to say about the beginning. When I work, one of the items I like to use is a reducing lens. If I want to show close up, can you see it like that?
Hang it, Rick, by your palette is easiest.
Oh, it's just that, right? But I put the tape around here, and I actually I have a number of these lenses, and it's exactly the opposite of a magnifying glass. So instead of making big things bigger, it makes it smaller. And I first found it useful in my landscape painting because you are compressing the whole field of what you're looking at, and you're now just defining it by a perimeter. So I put down tape that's the same size and proportion ratio as my canvas. A lot of times what I do is on some of these I have Velcro tape that I can change the aperture depending on the size of the canvas, if it's square or elongate. So that really helps you when you're composing. When I look at my setup, my picture, I really deconstruct it completely. I do not think of it as the subject matter of flowers, in this case, on a tabletop. It's a matter of pattern, value, color, and my starts are just all that way. And actually, the whole process, as it turns out, is that way. I remove the thought process, and this is where I think we kind of have departed kind of ways here in a sense, because mine is purely in the optical lens. And I found, for me, it really helps out to think of things that way. So when I'm looking at this, for example, I put in this mass tone here, which simulates pretty close to what I'm looking at just there in nature. It gives me a basis. I'll see at this point here, I have the tabletop, and now I'll come with a note that's very similar to what I'm looking at in here. And I look at this and I think, well, where is that separation happening? How far up? What's the ratio of my background to this? And then I'll mass in, what's this dark thing that's in the center? And what kind of, like for example, what's in the exact center? In fact, I could actually pinpoint something on here once I get enough notes down, and I could carry it over here, lay this so that it's right over the top of my whole canvas. And actually I get my drawing down really quick that way. So that's the way I work. and I find this very useful like that.
Yeah, so that reducing lens, I hadn't heard of anyone using that.
Well, it's amazing. I don't run across anybody using it, and I feel it's like a painter's tool. The one thing about it is that the reducing lens is hard to find now with all the camera equipment and everybody having a cell phone. You know, I mean, the cell phone, it does about the same thing, but for some reason, I just like the lens a lot better. So here we go. So I'm just going to divide this off this way here.
So Rick, so one of the things I'm doing right now is I'm conceiving of the space before putting in the objects. So I'm thinking about the way the light is going across the background, thinking about the cast shadow. So I'm creating a three-dimensional space before I put the flowers into that space.
Oh, okay.
So it's that's I think, again, going back to like just some of the really interesting differences that kind of exist and evolve. In New York, they did this crazy thing, which I was never really comfortable with, but I think it is a good practice to learn if you're a student, and there's advantages to it and disadvantages, but they would start in one spot and finish as they go.
Oh.
So let's say if I want to start with my rose, I would conceive of the note, it's in shadow, and I would hit that note, and it would be irrelevant to everything else in my painting. It would only be taken into consideration in nature. So I would place that note according to what I understand it to be doing.
And you didn't like that?
Well, it's not that I don't like it, but it was unnatural for me, especially coming from a different background. And so it was always a little bit hard for me to solely exist in that state of mind or mindset where you have to entirely forget about the relationships occurring in your canvas and just kind of focus on the actual the reality that's happening in nature as opposed to.
Well, I'll be honest, I have a harder time with that thought pattern, because to me, everything is in relation right from the beginning. And if I don't see the partner note, I can't know the other notes. You don't know color, value, any size. I always, what I use is the illustration of kids in a classroom, little kids, if you're trying to line them up from the tallest to the shortest.
Okay.
Yeah, when you see them walking around, it's very tough to say, I think you're first, let me see, you're that.
Sure.
Until they all line up, and that's what I try to do, is I line
great.
them up, and I try to see it, and then the family.
Right.
You talked about Jeff? About Jeff with his highest note? That's I trained Jeff Larson.
Yeah.
So that was my training, is we talked about the sense of the highest, lightest note and your darkest note, and then your ranges of where you are, and then you have that relativity that you can work your way through.
Establishing the context of the environment, I guess, or the context of your paints, because in nature it's brighter than. So in other words, Jeff would talk about the highlight is the lightest light, and so he would use pure white for that, and then he would calculate from that a note close, and then he would extrapolate, and so he's building those reference points off of value and chroma.
Right, exactly, and that's partly my training. Is that conflicting then? Do you think that?
A little bit. I mean, it doesn't conflict. It's just a different. This is something I want to emphasize for the audience, and we had mentioned it before, that the value of this kind of conversation is that you at home can start to understand and realize that you are your own artist, and you have to come up with your own method and use your own palette and brushes, and so it's not wrong or right, it's just there's differences, and we're both being inspired by nature, pulling information from nature. It would be like two scientists kind of having two different theories about how something works. So it's definitely anything that we throw out And don't view it as right or wrong, just view it as two different ideas that you can pull from. So.
Yeah, well, I think though those are pretty much on the opposite end of things.
Because let's say, so the reason why I think it doesn't, for me, it's, I don't, let's say there's a intense, in that flower to the left, there's an intense orange note coming through the petal. Well, I don't have to put that to understand that it's there. So, but I like the analogy of the kids, because you can guess and you can get a sense of how tall the kids are, but until you actually put it and you line them up, there's smaller differences that then become apparent once they're next to each other. So I think that they're, again, it's both valid. Like if you were to ask me just to mix that note and put it over here and allow it to kind of hang out for a while, and then later on put it into context, I think I could get pretty close.
Well, do you think, but if you put it down earlier though, could you get closer faster? That's all.
Yeah, maybe. And most likely I would probably resort to that because of your influence. So I go back and forth from kind of the mentality of that there's a lot that's possible if you conceive of the entire space, but it's not perfect, because sometimes you just have to grind it out. It's like if you're a chef and you want to put a pinch of salt. Well, what is a pinch of salt? And then you taste it and you realize, okay, well, it needs another pinch of salt. Well,
yeah, as you
know, it's like
you render it
further, yeah, right.
It does make a difference.
But there is a recipe and there's an idea or something that would, make sense if you. So there's.
Well, for example, just like I'm doing this right now, when I put down this mass of green, it's going to lighten this area up compared to what it was initially. It looked really dark, so that when you surround something with a darker tone, that becomes lighter there. So that's where why I try to just be very broad and put things in as broad as I can. And then I look at this, and what I'm thinking about is actually just what size is that space, what's its value compared to this, what's its color temperature. And it becomes, like I said, very, very abstract. So I'm not really having to think about it. I'm just adjusting as I go to try to get things masked in there for quick. And then I go back and I use this, and I would just reference that, and it helps compress the field and tell me things. There's one thing I do too when I have reds, like these flowers, these deep reds. I tell everybody to stay away from putting red in, because you're adjusting.
I like that. Yeah, I saw that in one of, I don't know where I saw it, but I think you had given me an old video or something that someone recorded, and so as I was thinking about this class, I watched it, and I thought that was a really great tip, because if you put in alizarin and magenta right away, it gets all over the place, and then you have to deal with cleaning it up.
Well, what was kind of interesting, if you talked about your colors too. You had the darkest primaries. You had them down in 3. You had a black for blue.
So for those of you who've taken some of my classes in the past, they've heard this many times. But in the lower left is this idea of the least saturated primary colors. So it'd be blue, red, and yellow. And so that's ivory, black, burnt umber, and raw umber.
Oh, okay.
So if I were to put white in them, you'd see just subtle variations of blue, pink, and yellow.
That's good. I like that. See, and I might, because I only use raw umber. In fact, I need to put more out there. But I think the burnt umber is pretty good, because that is the reddish note.
So do you have a neutral blue? That would be your 12 shades of gray.
Yeah. A neutral blue. Well, it's funny. I think a black and white to me becomes.
Well, right. That's that. Yeah, the ivory black.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, there I am. So I think there's a plein air painter that I know, Scott Anderson, and we've talked about the fact that actually he did for a while drop blue out of his palette, because he felt that it was sufficient to have that black and white, and especially for plein air. the blues kind of overtake. If you get the skies too chromatic, too blue, it just dominates things. So you know, you have that horizon going up, you have that water vapor and all. You don't need that blue sky. We always kind of tie in that zenith above us. So the sky is blue, and so he eliminated it, and we use black, and I use it same thing for the greens. I'll use black and yellow a lot for my green. I don't know what you're using right now for green, but
so going back to the idea of building a scale and a point of reference. So my color harmony exists on my palette instead of my painting. It's both.
Oh, okay.
But I view this a lot as an instrument where I'm calculating. So I start out with burnt sienna and viridian for my green. So it goes warm and intense.
Oh,
and then
right,
to shoot up into the high chroma stuff, I create a scale where it's shadow and light.
Right.
And so then up here, I don't have to put it there, but I know that there's some really intense greens in those petals up there, or in the stem.
Right.
But to not overpower the composition at this point, it's figured out already over here.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Oh, that makes sense.
So then I talk a lot, and I'm not a musician, I don't know if you are, but I view this a lot though in like a scale, like a guitar neck or any kind of piano keys where you're constantly going back and forth, like a lot throughout the composition.
Right.
So it's left, right on my palette all the time. So if I go into shadow, it's left. If I go into light, it's right.
Okay. Yeah, that's very good. I like that. I like that idea a lot. Yeah, because you have to do that constantly. Well, I'm going to use this wedge in a little bit here, but let me just wipe out a few of these things. In the beginning, I use a lot of turpentine. I'm actually using Gamsol, but I'll lift out then from here my notes, and this is where I like to dip. Let me just get some more in here. But I'm going to actually remove paint with my wedge and show you how this works here. This kind of is, it'll just pull it right out real quick. So I can kind of just travel across, and depending on how much I want to lift out, if I want to keep it a little bit darker, I can just kind of get the idea of where things are just by doing that, hitting the top plane. It starts helping me real quickly to get things.
That's neat, I like that.
Yeah, so it just kind of, it's more suggestive, and that's the impressionist kind of thing here. It isn't the exactness of it. I'm just really going for the suggestion. It's funny because this is a brand new one. Let me get my old one.
Let me see the new one.
Oh yeah, because that really pulls the paint off. My older ones are rounded on the edges here. They're not quite as sharp, and I'm just used to that.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I think this is something I really enjoy.
And I mean, obviously, have you seen other people like how they use it? Like, have you? I mean,
I've never
it's
come
obviously
anyone
made
using
for something.
it. Yeah, I don't know how this. I saw it at the art store, and I thought, well, maybe I'll just try it out to see. It was in the brush section, and it's like, I don't know why, but it was not near the palette knives. But I thought, well, it must be. I thought first it might be ceramics because they have different shapes, and maybe it's for throwing a pot. You're using these, and I didn't know. So I tried it out, and I started using it for this, cool. And this is, but I think it just kind of is really kind of a neat thing, and then I'll come back and soften things. And what I'm working off is a white ground, so that I can get back to that ground, and that really helps me to be able to.
Now, okay, so this is, that's another influence, because for a long time, and normally I do, so in some of the videos that we've sold, I work with a white ground, and it goes back to what you talked about with watercolor. Yeah. About lifting up the pigment and replacing it. So, and also getting back to that, let's say if I want to take magenta, and for that dahlia that you have, and I want to put it on the white ground, I can get already 2 layers because the light's passing through, hitting the white and coming back through the, so if you do it with a gray ground, it's not as vibrant.
Right, I depend on that. I think
Right.
that vibrancy is laying inherently on the canvas, and why would you cover it up? But you know, it's harder. Everybody, especially outdoors, talks about the fact that if you have that white, it's just too powerful in your eyes, you know, and you're trying to always work against it. But I cover my canvas, as you saw, very quickly in the first 5 to 10 minutes, so I don't have that anymore. But I can retrieve it, which is a nice item here. So I could find, you know, points, you know, where I want to bring that back out. And actually, a lot of times in my finished work, I'll be right back down to that ground, and I realize that I haven't even covered it up. You know, I'm back down to the canvas and looking at that. So I found it to be very helpful. But I think it's part of my training is watercolors. I really believe that watercolors are
part of the
really,
training you teach people, or part of the training that you're
well, I encourage people. I used to teach more classes in watercolor. I don't anymore. But I think they're very valuable for oil painters, because when you have the pigments that are suspended in oil, they mask the working properties of their transparency, their granulating. And I think watercolors, it's like you could see the pigment itself. I think years ago it used to be the apprentices would grind pigments for the master, and they would understand the ratios and actually, the granulation of them and all that. And that's a big part of it. But now we just buy pigments. So I think working with watercolor brings you back to their working properties, and I think that's an essence that I find is very important.
So going back to the idea of mixing pigments and Impressionist and academic, the Impressionist influence on painting is very much opaque and alla prima, and the academic influence is to pull the saturation out of the oils and to do a lot more glazing and relying on multiple days to get that kind of I want to say brilliance or saturation to the painting. So that's why, again, not alluding to what you're doing, but if you're influenced by the Impressionists, that's why the Impressionists are always a little bit more chalky and a little bit flatter, rather than that, because they're putting less oil into it. As I go longer and longer, I put more oil and less pigment, and so it builds up all those transparencies.
Well, I didn't think of it that way, but I think that's a good way of putting it. Yeah, I can see that. The one thing I think about too is that chalkiness. We were just talking about light, you know, and about chromatic saturation. And I think that's one thing that to me is paradoxical. Is that I always think of something in light, especially outside. Tends to desaturate the chromatic intensity. We were talking about that yesterday. And whereas it seems like it should be that more light, the more you see, the brighter, the more intense the pigment. But actually, the more light, the less saturation. It tends to leach or bleach out, to me, the brilliance of something, and you desaturate in the lights, and then leave the shadows for more chromatic depth, you know. And I don't know if that's different from what you were just saying. The Impressionists were outdoors trying to search for that, and I think to me, and my understanding was they went into the shadows and saw a lot of color in the shadows, and that's where they keyed off of and used that brilliance in there, and then they kind of desaturated more towards the lights, especially I think the American Impressionists, maybe not so much the French. The Americans, I think of
most likely,
Benson, Tarbell, you know, that crew up there.
Yeah, that's again a very kind of clear difference in the two. Then, if say you think of Velázquez or Rembrandt, and then a lot of the academic art of the 19th century, kind of responding to that, the shadows are very dark and not chromatic. Sometimes they're just wiped, you know, they're brown. They're not, but then as you get up into the lights, then you have some of they build it up and then glaze over top to get the brilliance and the lights.
Very true. I think I think the French, and well, maybe that was the time period. I don't know, but I know they were more interested. To me, it's the difference between a sketch and a study. You know, that they were doing the studies, and then the Impressionists went and did the sketch because they were more after the color harmonies and the overall breadth of the piece, whereas the studies were more about the structural things. And I think the French, with all their drawings and all that. One thing I noticed that I want to point out too, speaking about that, is just drawing things. When I'm teaching, I teach people to do this lay-in with the patterns of masses of value, because I tend to put drawing down notches on my drawing values, edges, and that's what I was taught was the 3 pillars, like of making, paint making there on the canvas, was your drawing was imperative. And you're always drawing, you know, and you hear that phrase. And I've taken that down a number of notches, thinking that, to me, I think that that's almost a stumbling block, and why a lot of people don't paint. And I teach a lot of people that never painted before, is if you could just mass in values and arrange that pattern, and that's why I like that reducing lens, whatever I did with it. Oh, it's in my pocket. But you know, if you could look at something, squint down, and then just simulate that pattern of values, you're essentially drawing, because that component is part of it. But to reduce something down to a linear line, saying that, to me, I think I always had a hard time. I couldn't confuse. I got more confused, because to me it's like speaking another language. It's like putting another layer, and you're using your left side of your brain to be able to translate that mass and say there's a perimeter or borderline, rather than just massing in a value there. So I tend to just do it really quickly.
That's why at the museum yesterday, you stayed by the Dutch Floral so long. It's like, and here's the Dutch Floral, and Rick's like, boo.
I went through that pretty quick. Well, I was trying to keep up with you. Michael took me to the museum yesterday, and I should have put on my running shoes. But we came in. It was a half hour left to go. And he said, we'll run through this museum real quick. So here's the Dutch paintings. We were just going through it pretty quick. But it was nice. I think sometimes you end up doing that anyway in a museum, but that was pretty funny. And then that guy, one of the guards, kept bringing us over to the paintings.
No, this is the part I like best. He said, you have 10 minutes left. And then he started talking. I was like, if we have 10 minutes left, there's like, how many more paintings I need to show Rick? And he was like, blah, 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 blah. I was like, you just said there's 10 minutes left.
Oh, it was funny. Yeah, when he showed us that one Dutch, it was that one with the watermelons and all. And he said, you could just kind of bite you. And we both were backing away. That was pretty funny. Yeah, it was good.
He was a nice guy, though.
He was.
Do we have questions from the audience? Yeah. Okay, cool.
So the first one's from Pat Mayer. She or he was just asking, what is the initial tone background on the canvas for Michael?
Okay. Just for everyone, you don't have to do it all the time, but if you're international, we'd like to hear where you're tuning in from. So go ahead, and if you submit a question, let us know if it's England or Australia or wherever. Pat, thank you. I originally came into it thinking that I was going to paint on this gray, but it was too short. So this was alkyd leg ground with raw umber and ivory black. And this one was, because I needed it to dry, I toned over the same painting. There's a painting underneath this. It was a landscape that I never finished. And so it's just a tone over a painting. So it ended up, so that's why I covered it so quick, because I wanted talking about relationships on it, get the true tone behind what I'm painting. So regardless of what you have, you kind of set up the painting every time, building those relationships.
Okay, the next question from Taylor Hitchcock has asked, do either of you reference floral anatomy in your head like one would reference human anatomy when painting the figure?
I think I've answered that one. For me, I don't think about it. I think you do think more about it.
I wish I did. That's part of
All right.
So I would recommend it. So that's just part of kind of my character as a person, and how I kind of study things is I really, there will be periods of time where I'll study a lot of human anatomy if I'm going to draw the figure, and then I let it go. And with flower painting, for whatever reason, I've tended to lean towards the impressionist aspect and not get into the anatomy of it. So.
But it is a good check. Yeah. For me, I think it's if you want to see or know if you painted it right, it always is complimentary. You know, and I'm sure you get it where people say, "Gee, you know, you've done that dahlia. You saw that really well." And I mean, a lot of it is observation, but then the check is to be able to know that you've gotten the structure and things that are right with a rose. There's a certain way every tree grows, every plant, everything has a certain aspect and all. And you can, for me, I kind of double check that in the end. So maybe I'd rephrase and say I do think about that myself a bit, but more towards the end as more of a kind of like our government or
checks
should be
and
government, checks and balances.
The process of understanding structure. So if I'm putting down a gesture or a line, I'll be thinking about like where the stem's growing from. So if this stem goes up that way, things like that. I'll think of structure, but if I understood more about the particular kind of green that was up there, I would understand that, you know, the leaves act a certain way, and therefore there's a grouping of them that splay out a certain way. And so it would allow me then to just continue. I think it's best if you're inventing, and same with painting from life, the figure. If you do a lot of if the model's shifting, you need to be able to understand that it's not a good idea to chase it. So in floral painting, it would be similar. If it died and you no longer have the reference, then you need to reinvent it, and then that's where that information would be really valuable.
And speaking of dying, well, you know, these are sagging a bit, these flowers here, but we recut them and we're believing that they're going to regenerate here. But that's the one thing about florals that make them really difficult. They always are changing, you know, especially certain flowers, like we were talking about tulips, you know, you watch them moving in front of you while you're painting them there. So if you want a certain relationship, like say, for example, you're going through and doing the multitude of stages of the tulip in a certain painting, you want something just closed and something at the end that's drooping, almost dead, you know, at the other end. That structure would be very beneficial. Definitely would be, and that's the way you said it.
I always encourage people to study it if they're. I would never say not to.
Yeah, that's a good way to say it, yeah. All right, I'll go with that.
Are there more questions, or are we going to save them?
That's all for now.
Great. All right, so a little bit on, for me, with the first day, because I'm going to be working 3 days on it. For me, the first day is building a fresh foundation. I talk about that a lot, and it's something that I've found to work well for me. Is I'm very concerned at the beginning about building a relationship of all of my color harmony on my palette, and then not overworking it as I lay those colors down. So I want fresh paint upon fresh paint upon fresh paint. I don't want to put down notes that are going to destroy something that I've done previously. So I'm building, and so the fresher it can be the first day, regardless of if the drawing's accurate or not. That's good in my mind, because if I flip back and forth, my gut reaction and my kind of emotional side of reacting to the setup is based a lot off of the value structure and the color.
Mm-hmm.
So whereas there's other people, and I think that's what there's other people who are like more linear, and if it's not drawn right, they can't go forward.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And then you get caught up in that little intricacies and all that, rather than the massing of the large relationships. And I'm with you on that. Yeah.
So an academic approach to floral painting would be to do drawings and studies, and then to work from those drawings and studies. So if I did this, maybe that would be one stage. Then I would sit here with my pencil and white chalk and develop a better understanding of the anatomy of it, and use those things to compose then the final piece, like the Dutch stuff we saw. I don't think those are very much composed. And
I was thinking that very thing. Exactly. I'm with you all the way. Yeah. That was the thing I was referencing in my mind while you were talking, was exactly the Dutch, and that came from a study that was done previously, an arrangement and a well thought through value pattern. Everything was thought through, and then you're taking component by component.
And it's a formula that they've practiced and done over and over, and then they have a system. They have a system to paint a little drop of water on the leaf,
a
petal,
butterfly or whatever.
So the drop may not be there, but they have a system to do it, to recreate those. So they may have done little studies of just doing little water droplets and to figure out how the light passes through.
Yeah, you're right. Yep, I think of it the same way.
Yeah. Are you familiar with Carlo Russo's paintings?
I have seen him. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
He's going more in the direction of that, where he's very interested in the realist. Realist, I wouldn't say hyper-realist, because that's more photorealist stuff, and he's not into that. But definitely the stuff we've been referencing, he's very inspired by it, and doing a lot more of it in his floral work. So it's fun to see.
One thing, I don't have my mirror. That's one thing. Do we have a mirror around here?
Do you ever use your phone as a black mirror? Is that?
Oh, I don't use a regular mirror. We'll pick one up. I'm an instrument guy. I don't know why I forgot that. I like to use tools. I like to check myself. I stand back. I was just thinking what you were saying about that is, one of the things I always talk about is to get back from your painting. And we were just talking about the fact because Michael is sitting there. But, for me and my thinking, I like to get back and really stand back. It helps me to see the overall arrangement where I am. I was taught to have a mirror behind me too, and when I'm at my studio, I actually have this large mirror that sits right behind me. So I'm always looking back there and looking to check it, to see it, because the one thing it does too is that actually a mirror, and it took me a long time to realize that. Oh, look at that. Oh, thank you. Look at this. A mirror actually doubles the distance because the light is traveling, that way and back. That.
So it'd be like if you're back there. Yeah.
Exactly. So it really helps to be able to see it that way. Oh my gosh, it's really it's like, cut. All right. Alrighty. But I find that invaluable. I think tools in the hand of the artist really help extend it. And nowadays, I was asking Louis about apps. There's now apps that people use, and there's some interesting things out there that reduce your painting down to a black and white components, for example. And that really, I think some of these are really kind of new technology, new value. I think there's probably things that are really helpful for people nowadays to be able to do it. But whatever helps you, and this is my theory, be able to see it truthfully, if I could say it that way, rather than to kind of, you can't impose your way on a painting. To me, I just paint what's there, and I pretty much, and I've had this experience, and I'll just be honest about it. I remember one time they did this they filmed me painting this one person at an art center. I won't name it. And there was somebody that sat for me while I painted her painting. And I did the painting, and the painting turned out that she looked a little withdrawn, a little forlorn. You know, she wasn't smiling and happy and all that, but that was the way she looked. You know? And she didn't see herself that way. And I remember her comments were that way, and I remember the cinematographer that was filming the whole thing. After she got done talking about it, he came up to me and he says, "That's the way she is." You know, you caught her exactly, because everybody knew that she was not the happy-go-lucky that she saw herself as. And it's happened a number of times in my life when I've done portraits are hard, and anyone that does portrait work, you know, people see themselves differently. I had one woman that she swore she had alabaster skin, and that was her term. It was not alabaster, and but you know,
I think they're paying you to make a work of art how they see themselves. So.
I should know that. But yeah, you're right. That's why they're not going to a photographer. They're coming to someone that can, yes, exactly. So my hat's off to people.
The portrait artist, yeah. That's why I'm not a great portrait artist, because I'm not as good at understanding how to make something flatter the sitter. And that's a talent, that's a separate talent.
Oh yeah, I think so, for sure. Yeah, you look at it, you see photographs of even sergeants, sitters, and when the painting there, I've seen that, and they're not exact copies of them at all. So for me, I am just always working my way from dark to light. I haven't put these red, you know, that'll change it in a bit. Not too much in the future here. I'm going to put in these red dahlias. I'm holding back on some of the arabesque on the outside because of the fact that it's still looking a little wilted. And so I'm holding back on that, but I'm trying to pick up on the feeling of the rest of the composition here. And again, it's just going to be masked in the beginning. I need to darken some things here. But I pretty much paint what I see, and that's the bottom line for me. And so when I paint my subject matter, I happen to do a lot of flowers because I like flowers, and I live next to, or really close to, the Minnesota Landscape Arboretum. Okay. And for the second year in a row, they've won the title for the best arbor or the best floral arbor nationally. So they've done very well with that, and thankfully they allow us to paint in there without charge and all that. And I think it's really nice because it kind of helps the feeling. It makes it seem like a French garden or something when you have people out there painting. It's very different. So I kind of think it helps them and it helps us. But I like going out there. For me, I follow the flowers in their season, the trees. I start early in the year, and when the things just are starting out, and I follow right through the whole season. Some of my favorites are the crabapple time out there, and just doing the crabs, and then I'll go through to the peonies, into the roses, and it's really nice to do that.
That's great.
So it's a seasonal thing for me to go through. Now I just soften up. Here, this is something, and now what I'm doing now, I actually saw Richard Schmid use for whatever I thought, to me it was like heresy. You mean you're not using a brush or something? He was using a paper towel and doing things, and it gave me license, which really helped me with the wedges and all. I thought it doesn't matter what you're using, as long as it gets to whatever you're looking at, you know, because I don't think anybody would argue that he could get to what he's looking at for sure. And so
you had mentioned in a conversation a little while back that if you would have known early on that Richard was around, you would have maybe tried to
Probably
Yeah.
would have. It was by chance. It was actually a person that had their portrait done by Richard Lack. That's who I studied in the atelier out that way. He recommended, because he knew my interest in art, he recommended that I check it out. And I thought, well, I should check it out. And there was another mutual friend that was going to go there to study under him, and I was actually surprised my wife went along with it, because I held that back, just for a while, wondering what I could say. As I was thinking of moving, we were in Pennsylvania, moving to Minnesota to just study for a while under this artist. And she said, sure, which I mean, surprised me, and that was very, very nice, very touching that she would believe in me and do that, and that's what I did. I traveled out that way. But at that point, I knew nobody else, and there was no reason, I didn't...
There's no internet.
Well, Steve Jurtson, one of his students, was on the cover of The American Artist. And it so happened that I went to an art school that became very, very, moved into the modern art. So what I was doing was just not really accepted too much. There was a lot of... it wasn't looked upon in a favorable light, because they moved away from all that. So anyway, I like the realistic type of work, and that's what I wanted to pursue. So it was nice and refreshing for me to do that. But like you said, had I known maybe about Richard, it was a lot closer. He was up in Vermont. No, I think he was in Chicago at the time.
Probably, yeah. But I'm just thinking also, as far as like how you connect with his color and whatnot.
Yeah. Well, and this is pretty funny too, because I don't know if it's a sign of age or whatever. I like things in a stage that aren't completely rendered. Although I appreciate completely things very well done, like that Bouguereau show, for example. I went to it in Milwaukee, and I mean, it floored me. I was stunned, and I appreciate that so much. But I personally feel like I get bored with something after a period of time, and I just can't stay with it. In fact, that's why why in a way I'm doing 2 paintings here, and that's what we talked about, was the fact that I can only take something for so long. And what I actually do nowadays, and I'll admit to this too, is just that I do take a photograph, which I did do. I should take a photograph, just of my work in the beginning. And I do this with my landscapes too, and then at the end I try to do that. And that way I know how nature's changed, I know what I was looking at, and if I need to revisit that at some point, because sometimes it lays in the studio, you put it against the wall while it's dry, and then you'll revisit it and you'll look at it, and then you get ideas. Or else, honestly, there's things in there that I don't know what they are. I'll make these marks, and it's like, well, what is that? Is that a leaf? Is that a flower? And it's like, oh my gosh, you know what I mean? They're sufficient sometimes to leave it go, and I love that interplay of abstraction and realism. I delight in that. And I think that's one of the things about Sargent. He left so many marks that are just so believable. Like the flight from Egypt, we were just talking about it yesterday. We saw the painting, and the Mary is just nothing but a black space, there's nothing there at all. It's just, and yet he didn't feel the need. Now, had he taken a photo?
Yeah, right. I was going to say, if he took a picture, he would have gone back in.
Yeah, render Mary, but then the mystery of who was Mary would have been all gone.
Is there any more questions? No? Okay. So to address the photo issue a little bit more, just so that those viewing can benefit from the conversation. There's a sentiment, and there's a kind of a sub-movement of the realist market that is very interested in painting from life, which is really great, because it starts to decipher and separate and make distinctions about, that's essentially what connoisseurship is. So it starts to allow the collectors to pursue a certain kind of thing if they like that particular thing. And it's always a question that people ask, you know, do you use photos in your work? Because everyone struggles with it, everyone thinks about it, and it's part of our society and culture. And I always tell people that I do, but the reason why I do a 3-day demo is that I try to give them a sense of when I don't use photos. You know, a lot of times I don't, and I don't want to, and I'd rather not. And so, ideally, if I can do it without the photo, I most certainly will. You know, that's the, and so I think that it's just it's a decision that, as an artist, you would have to make if you want to participate in that kind of movement. And then you would have to stay really faithful to it. And so you're not lying to people. So if you like claim to only paint from life, then you should be honest about it and try to stick to it. But if you enjoy painting from life, but you paint from photos, it should be a non-issue. And you should just say, well, I use whatever I can. I use a rubber brush.
Yeah. I think that's a good point. Yeah, I think you're right. Well, you know, we talked about this the other day. We were talking about artists in their studios. You know, when you walk in there, you knock on the door, anybody here? And you start walking through, and all of a sudden you hear this collapsing and all this stuff, commotion.
Oh,
it's
right.
like, because they're doing something,
But they're not
what are you up
supposed
to
be
back there?
doing.
Yeah, and it's, you know, and the way I look at it, I've ruined more work with photos. I sometimes don't think it's beneficial. I think, in fact, you tend to ruin things when you go to photography. Yeah. And if you're trained from life, I mean, it's a good check. And you know, it's like, how much does it influence what I do? You know, I'll admit, like, just when we were setting up for this, I noticed that we were trying to pick the fabric for the background, and I have a multitude of different kind of fabrics. Actually, it was my students felt bad for me because there's so many that they get paint on and all that, so they bring me another sliver or remnant of fabric. So I have a whole slew of them, you know. So I'm always changing them out to get the color, but we were limited in what we were picking here. And then I saw in the setup on the TV monitor there that it's reading the background cooler than what my color is. And I liked it better on the monitor, so I'm actually painting and shifting a little bit cooler than what I see it, or staying on that cooler side intentionally because I kind of liked it better. Yeah. So in that sense, am I using photography? Well, I am. A little bit. I am in a way. And so it's like how much, I guess.
Right. 1/4% at this point in your process. You know, you saw it, you were inspired by it. And
well, what we need is the government, FDA, needs to get involved and tell us what level of influence is there. And then once you cross that threshold, man, you better, there you go. But that's a good point, though. You're right. I think, but you know, and the one thing about it is that the harm is that I think is that anybody that's painted and then works from life, is the deceitfulness of a photograph. I don't know why I don't understand it enough, but maybe it's just the fact that it's a flat image, or it's limited in its ability to adjust to color value or whatever, but it distorts what's really there. It gives you an opinion that is not correct.
Also, I think that we're in a culture of images, and people, like I sometimes go through museums and I just think, man, if they would have been as influenced by photography as we are, they would have never left that as they did. But because painting was still the best medium to view reality, it was the plasma TV, the film of the world. You know, there was nothing that would compare to Fantin Latour's floral paintings. So, if you are in that position, imagine, you know, in the world, you're one of the only people who can actually share what a color image looks like with the world.
Yeah.
I mean, just the demand of that would be phenomenal. And there's no other reference that there's no one to compete with. You're the only, not only do other people not understand floral painting, but there's no other color images in the world. I mean, it'd just be a fascinating kind of situation.
That's interesting, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I think we're so used to looking at paintings that are done from photos that then we compare ourselves, our drawing, our whatever, to all these photorealist paintings, that you are even afraid to leave something because people don't understand painting on that level.
Right. Well, you know, I think, and from the layman, that's the belief is the highest compliment is, boy, that looks just like a photo.
Right.
You know,
in our time period, yeah.
And it's amazing that that's really not the end of things there, but yeah, that's a good comment.
We have a couple of questions.
Oh, okay.
One's pretty long. I'm going to try and just sort of give you an overview of what they're trying to say. But so it's from Marianne Innes, and she was just commenting on what you said, Rick, about that light desaturates chromatic intensity, and that she's been taught varying different opinions on where the most chromatic point is when it comes to light. She said at Angel Academy she was taught that the most chromatic area was in the halftones. And that as light increases on the form, the colour is washed out. Yes. She was also taught with other instructors that trained at GCA that the most chromatic area of a sphere is in the light. So she says she understands that there's different schools of painting, but until recently she didn't realise there were differing opinions on where the light creates the most chromatic areas. She says, is this difference similar to what Rick is saying, that the light desaturates the chroma versus GCA's conceptual form, where the most chromatic area is in the light? I'll repeat that last bit again if you want me to.
No, I think she's actually right. I think she has a good understanding of what. So Rick was saying there's a painting actually by Dennis Miller Bunker that's a good example of this. That one of the pink rose, where the form is turning on the pink rose, and he gets up to the lights, and he just basically is using like white paint, because he wants to establish the highest peak of the form, but two, as it's going and turning, that kind of intense chroma is in the halftone. So for him to put that pink in the lightest light, he wouldn't have been able to get the light effect that he was going after. So I think there's obviously a physics behind it, but there's also an effect that you can go after. Like in that instance, Bunker decided to wash out the lights, is what you're saying. And he emphasized allowing the halftones and the shadows to be more chromatic. Whereas if it's specifically or solely the physics of it, maybe the lightest light is in the highlight, because the most light is bouncing back to your eye or something. You know, I think that's more of a science argument versus how it's effective and how it can be effective in your art. But what do you think?
Well, what you just said is kind of interesting, because when you add all the colors of light together, you get white light. So, I mean, the more angles of light that are coming back to us, the cumulative effect of all that wave energy would move it, shift it towards white. I think about a white cloud in the foreground would be whiter, brighter, more light, as that is being robbed of its intensity by the atmosphere. It goes towards the reddish, violet, the longest waves. So it moves that way, so it shifts into a color. So I don't know if that is science or what, but I think about sometimes the optics. I've gone through that a bit. There's some books I really tried to understand a little bit more of this physics behind it, and there's been new information out there, and I've kind of stopped, but I remember reading about that. But that could help explain physically what's happening there, why you would see more light vibration. Perhaps. Never thought of it that way till right now.
Yeah. What was the book that you mentioned last night? That
there's a book, Ellen Marks, is the author, and this is going to be a hard thing to pronounce. The optical simultaneity of color. I don't know if that's the exact title, but it does. If you look up Ellen Marks, just like Marx Brothers, she wrote this book, and it's mainly a picture book, so it's easy reading, made for people like me. So anyway, she has a lot of diagrams and a lot of information that deals with the optical end of viewing things, because you have the two light theories. You have the additive light theory and the subtractive. And painters only really talk about the subtractive because we're removing light as we mix our pigments together, where the pigments have that absorption of wavelengths of light. So they produce a color that we see by robbing all that light coming back. They tend to remove it. Now that's totally on the flip side of theater lighting. Theater lighting, or any kind of additive light, is taking light that's cumulatively being added together, as you would see in the theater. They have that amber, that green, and that blue light. And the reason they don't have cyan, magenta, and yellow is because it's actually the secondary colors. They flip it around. There's that interrelationship. But you're adding light together, wave energy, to produce a color. So, so one is the additive and one is the subtractive. Now, when you're optically viewing something, the question is, what are you doing? Well, to me, you're going to that additive end, because these notes are cumulatively, side by side, coming back to me and to my eye, to my eyes, hitting on my retina, and then it's sending information out of my brain. And why I like the Impressionist, this says it too, is I try to bypass that optic nerve to the brain. You know, I just try to paint what my eye is seeing. So it becomes a pattern. It's, you know, I always talk about the fact that, to me, we see with our brains. You know, because we understand things. We need to. Since a baby, you put things together, and then that always influences us. Now, if you could remove that, and I think it was Monet that wanted to get back to the seeing like a baby, to just be honest with notes that cumulatively would be there, and that's what the Impressionists were after. I think they had that understanding that when you put color notes together, they will give you a certain effect of color or light, a vibration.
Yeah.
So that was a long answer for a long question. How about
So,
that?
yeah.
It's just,
And I had asked if the glazing then would be the additive. You said that's still subtractive. The additive is only when I put a solid color of green next to a solid color of yellow, to then when it reaches my eye, the sensation or the thing that my brain is registering is that it's a certain hue that's neither or but mixed.
right.
Yeah.
And that's yeah, because and see what it would be, and that's what the Impressionists were trying to do, and they couldn't really do really well, is patterns of dots. If we can make them small enough, and that's what we do in printing process.
Or like a TV.
Or a TV.
Yeah,
A
right.
TV is an additive. That's a really good example.
All right.
And that would be the phosphors, the light.
Okay.
Now, I don't know. Now we've moved to LED. I've totally lost it. I don't know what they're doing. But it used to be these phosphors that would glow at a certain ratio, and then you can get back to it. And that's the print process. They called it actually partitive. And the reason they used partitive is it did both. You had that cumulative optical additive light, but then the inks actually overlapped each other, which would be the subtractive process. So they were using both, and they call it partitive. And that's the technical
So maybe
term.
that's why my gut reaction to the Munsell system is only for, its original purpose was to be able to send a letter across the ocean and tell your colleague what kind of gray is, or green is this leaf that I'm studying that's over in America.
Oh,
So there
okay.
was a system, a language of color, that because they didn't have any other way of doing it, that they could name a color. a very specific color. But then people want to bring that into painting, and I think what you're talking about is, so someone who's really obsessive about Munza would only be subtractive. They wouldn't be ever operating in an additive kind of mindset.
Well, we tell ourselves, yeah, that's void.
Most painters are only like
Right.
they're saying it's only the mixture that I can make on my palette here, and what I see, I put it down, and that's the answer.
Right.
But what you're saying is there's another side of it that opens up, and it's like we talked about. People, I think, can understand it better if I have a gray note on my painting, and I put a bunch of red around it, it'll look bluer.
Yes.
And if I have a gray note and I put a bunch of blue around it, it'll look grayer.
That's going to the optical.
Yeah. And so that's additive.
That's the additive process.
Right.
Yeah. And that's the relationship, the effects that happen with simultaneous contrast. There's contrasting values, or contrasting of color, hues, and boy, there's been a lot of material written about that, and well, not a lot actually, but there's a big misunderstanding, I think.
So last night was the first time I had heard of that, just because I don't think a lot of artists talk about it, but you've argued a lot of painters, right, about this idea. You don't have to say who, but I mean, like,
discussed,
so most people wouldn't
right.
kind of, you've had brilliant discussions about it.
Yes,
and
well,
so there's people on both sides of the aisle.
I wanted to understand it, so I made it my passion to get into that and be able to tear it apart and be able to present the information. When I was doing it, I had to go to the library, and I actually had to get books on physics, because nobody was really talking about it, and it got into physics about wavelengths of light and the process of picking out colors, and they had actually charts and all that about how many percentages of so much to so much would produce a certain effect, and then its usage in the mainstream was just to be able to do theater lighting, like I was saying, and that's the way they would do it. And actually, you had people trained in that area to be able to understand the percentages, to be able to change on the stage the effects and the color that people would appear to see, and it was adding light together. And that's why still, and you have on your computer, if you have a program where you can modify the color fields, and then you have the CYMK and the RGB, those are the two. One is the additive, one is the subtractive process. So you can go back and forth and move that around. In fact, I play around with it. I have one program like that, and I try to guess where that is. And there's some websites that are good. I don't have that information. I used to teach that color class, and then I would give out all the websites I had found, but there's a lot out there on that, and it's really not understood very well at all. And it's amazing how much lack of knowledge, I think, is out there with that end of things. Let me just darken this. Yeah, so.
Sure. I mean, you can get pretty far painting if you just look at a photo and you think lighter, darker, warmer, cooler.
Yeah. You don't need to. Yeah, you don't need to have the understanding, but it helps when people are asking questions.
Yeah.
You can at least sound intelligent to the point that you can bury them in something that they don't ask any more questions.
Speaking of, are there more?
Yeah, just like our politicians do. They just a lot of stuff, a long answer like that, but then, yeah, exactly. Take your clue, yeah. The proof is in the pudding, though. I mean, it's really about your paintings, and that's where it all comes in the end, and where that's at.
It's interesting, though, because in cameras and photography, the brighter the image is overexposed. If you blow it out, you lose all the detail. And you don't get anything, you just get white.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's
So whenever I'm exposing for something, we get a scale, and if you like from 0 to 100, 0 being black, 100 being white, to expose things perfectly, you set it at 50.
Okay.
So that could link back to maybe the half tones if you want to think of it that way.
Right,
but in photography, anything like over 80 on that scale is you're not going to get anything out.
It starts to wash it out. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's a very good point.
And all cameras are set to read and fire off neutral grey. Everything's set to grey, which is why you have a white card and a grey card to set your colours and exposures.
Oh, interesting. That's a good, boy, that's very
great.
good. That's very good. It's not
That's why
only
we got him here.
Yeah, that's why I got him here. Not only do the British sound smart, but actually this one is. Yeah, it's very good. I like that. That's good.
We've had a question from Leslie Hearn. Michael, can you explain your choice of stack lead white? There are so many whites to choose from. She's working from Colorado.
Yeah. So actually today I'm using titanium just because that was. I do have my stack lead white out here by me, and I'll squeeze it out on my palette, and maybe it'll start making me use it. So lead paint has to do with the physical makeup of how it's created, and they have longer particles that are more flexible. So as you know, George O'Hanlon, you can go on the Natural Pigments website and read about stack lead white. I think it's naturalpigments.com. But so they do, the process is earthenware jars with sheets of lead metal, and they make coils, and they put those in earthenware jars with vinegar. They suspend them over vinegar, and there's horse manure put inside, and they close it all up, and it corrodes the metal, and that's what makes it white. And so then they take that, clean it, and grind it, and it's a process of about 12 weeks. But that corrosion is what makes the particle size different.
Oh, wow.
And so if you start adding anything into that to change the makeup of the paint, or even the process, how quick you get there, it changes the particle size. And so the true lead white, from what George says, it was actually used with all painting before 20th century. So the Impressionists would have used it.
Wow.
But it wasn't until they started manufacturing paints different in the 20th century that they started introducing all these different things. But the main kind of, the normal makeup of paint would have been the stack lead white process.
Interesting. I didn't. This is the first time hearing it.
So if you ever look at Phantom Latour's paintings and say, how did he get those textures? It's because it's made with this white. And you feel how heavy it is.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Yeah, and so you feel free to squirt it out if you want to test what
I'll try that.
Because it's heavier too. You can actually, in the past, I've laid down a note, and I've mixed it with oleo gel and glazed over the note before it was dry, because it was so dense that the oil, the new mixture of oil, just went over top of it. So I didn't have to wait for it to dry. It was just the dense
The density
pigment.
of that just
so that's why I
there.
think maybe Phantom may have played around with some of that, because
That's a nice idea there. Cool. Wow, I didn't even know that. I got to read your materials list. So stack white. Who makes
stack
that?
lead white.
Stack lead white.
Yeah, Natural Pigments.
Oh, neat. Okay, that's very cool. That's wow. I didn't know that.
And so to give a nod to Rosemary, actually, and just kind of show her appreciation for what they do, I have a set of brushes which some of you may be familiar with, maybe not, but they're available on the website. That's everything I've been using today. And I want to, Joe was just over in England, and he was able to produce a really beautiful commercial. Do we have Rosemary's commercial? Yeah. So in a little bit, we're just going to take, it's like maybe a 4-minute video. So we're just going to take a little break and share that with the audience to see this beautiful commercial that Joe did. And you guys can just let me know when it's started.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
It's the creativity of me being able to manufacture and make something from start to finish. And when they pick up our brushes with my name on the handle and they start to paint with it, I love it when I hear them say, "This has changed my life." And I like to think now that I've given them a tool they can't blame. And it's amazing to see how their art changes. They're not just picking up a brush anymore, they're picking up an extension of their arm, an extension of their eye, of their vision. And I really feel strongly that I've actually tried to create some magic. I was brought up in the countryside, and I was brought up before the days of laptops and computers, so we literally used to go outside and play. I used to paint. I was an oil artist. As I used to paint, my brother was into fly fishing, and I would make Phillips ties for him, his fishing flies, and tie them off. I can remember this one day, and I said, how can I paint when I'm painting with utter rubbish? And he just looked at me and he said, well, you can make fishing flies, why don't you make your own brushes? That was it. Never discussed it any further, and it preyed on my mind a little bit. And in those days, if something happened to somebody in the village, they would pile all the stuff outside the garage. An elderly lady in the village, bless her, passed away. She was a phenomenal oil artist. They left all her kit outside, and I just made a beeline. And I actually bought the most magnificent set of brushes, canvas, easel, the lot. Got the brushes home, and in those days, folks used to make them with an aluminium ferrule, which is like rolled around and wrapped and tied. So I literally peeled these brushes open just to see the construction of how they were made. And it just became so obvious to me that if you can make fly fishing, you can actually make brushes. The folks in Stoke-on-Trent, the potteries, wanted to buy English. They didn't want to buy French or German, so they supported me. So I literally started out by anything I could get my hands on, like cornflake boxes were brilliant, or orange squash bottles, anything I could put the brushes in, pad them out and throw them in the post and know they were going to get there safe, was how I did it.
I remember Mum used to say, could you put some stamps on some packets for me? So me and my brother used to get, 12 or 15 packets a day, and we would literally go to Royal Mail and get stamps and start sticking them on. To think that we've gone from 15 packets a day to, a good day could be 180, 250 packets a day.
It didn't just stop then at supplying the UK and Europe. I decided I'm going to go to the States. Richard Schmid was at that event, he was the headliner. And Richard Schmid said, well, I've just met a new lady from England, her name's Rosemary, and I don't think I'll ever use another brush now. And he picked them up and started painting with these 3 brushes, and he finished his demo, and within 20 minutes of him finishing, I'd sold everything I took. Because I'm passionate about art, this isn't just business for me, this is my love, my life. It's a hobby of mine that turned into this business. And my dream was, I'm passionate about Georgian architecture. And the day I saw this property, I thought, we've got to have it. We can move the workshop into part of it, I can live in part of it. I think for all the folks who work with us here, this is a magical place. And the building to me breathes and oozes just art and love.
The main aim is to be what we always wanted to be, which is the best price, the best service, the best customer service, with the best product, and keep expanding like we are.
Simi, like I say, joined the company, and she's taken it that extra step because we'll get some of the top artists of the world, we'll bring them here. They can actually experience our love of art, and we hope when they leave that they get a little bit of us to take away with them, because I really believe we have created something special here, and we're ready now to take it to the next level.
All right.
Well, welcome back. So that was Joe's latest production of the history behind Rosemary and Company. So it was a really beautiful video that we're excited to share with you. So hopefully you enjoyed that. And it kind of illustrates how much care she puts into her brushes. So they're really great. So. And with that said,
I've heard much about it.
Yeah. So I'm trying to think. I mean, I can talk a little bit about. I'm concerned slightly that if someone has purchased this and hasn't purchased some of the other stuff or ever studied with me, or especially in your situation with your palette, I want to be sure to keep kind of going into some of the more technical aspects of what we're doing and how. So we're both using Gamsol at this point. Looks like you're maybe dipping into a little bit of the oleoresin gel. What do you normally use?
I use an alkyd base, and I've been using Williamsburg alkyd.
Okay, and it's a similar kind of gel like that?
It's, I think they're all like, what is that? Gamsol, Gamblin Paints has, is it Megalip or, no wait, there's Galkyd, you know, they got all these, Galkyd. The Galkyd is similar to the Williamsburg alkyd. It's all an alkyd base. There's, and what I do is, I'm going to lay that underneath, more of a transparent type of color underneath, and I'm trying to paint these notes that are underneath the flowers. That's the one thing about flowers, is that they have a lot of color vibration that's within the folds of the flower underneath. There it goes back to maybe, I don't know if it's light, less light, you know, going back, we're talking about where the chroma is. But the essence and the pulse, I think, of that flower is the, that heartbeat, that, you know, deep chromatic color that's inside those flowers. If you don't get that, that's where the essence is. And then what you do is or I think of it as putting veils, the petals, on top. And allowing some of that underneath to come through, between, aside, you know, and that's the process. So what I'll try to do here is, now I have the massing, I know where my things are, basically. I, you know, got the idea. Now I'll start working into the flowers by putting a medium on top. And what I like about the medium in that section is that it gets sticky. And it starts giving you drag, so it pulls the paint off easier. So instead of mixing the next layer on top, it'll pull it away from it. And that's my thinking, to be able to do that.
So the physicality, manipulating the paint to get mimic some of the light effect in nature.
Exactly.
That, in my understanding, and so leaning towards the I think academic painters, again, the kind of two schools of thought is, one is reinventing the space based off of everything that you understand. So in the Renaissance, it was perspective and anatomy and the understanding of the way the paint would behave on the surface and the light as form, and the understanding, you know, think of Da Vinci and just his really beautiful understanding of how light works. That's all very much influences the 19th century academic art. It isn't until the Impressionists came along and started thinking like Monet, and he cracked open the box of thinking more like a camera, or more like a, you know, plasma TV, and trying to get these different kinds of effects that are occurring in different mediums. So with the petals, what you're seeing, that glow it's a combination of transmitted light and diffused reflection. So it's going through one petal, bouncing around inside and coming back out. So it warms up as it goes through one petal, and it scatters as it hits the other petal inside and comes back to your eye. So that's like so then if you're really into it, you know, and you love that kind of thing, and so then you start, you know, building scales and trying to figure out exactly how to reproduce that effect, kind of through, it's almost developing methods like the Dutch, or developing a method to be able to create that effect that you're seeing. And where an impressionist is developing a method to create the emotion that you feel, I think.
I think that was well said.
Okay. Would you agree? Yeah.
Yeah, I think
okay.
I said exactly the same thing, didn't I?
All right. I taught you that, right?
Yeah, I taught you that, didn't I? Yeah. That's very good. No, that was great. I couldn't agree more. I think that was well said there. I like that part about that transmitted light, you know, light passing through like a stained glass window.
Yep.
And then the scattering of light, that's what the atmosphere, that's what substances do. That's surfaces, exterior, they will scatter the light. So you're right, the light is coming, striking them, bouncing around. And part of the problem of doing the flowers is to try to maintain that glow, you know, because you can lose that, you know, with especially in certain flowers. I think about, it just so happens yellow is one of the colors that is glowing in flowers. You know, that it happens that pollen is part of the reproductive system of that flower, and a lot of the interior folds contain something in that yellow family, and it glows. And the paradox to me is that yellow is a high value, you know. So yellow, when you're pulling it down through its scale from the high chromatic to something that's deep and dark and achromatic, it has, how do you maintain or fool people that yellow is there? And that's part of the problem, is to do that, you know. I think one thing I'll say too is just, I think about portrait painters, you know, the figure with the fingers, you know, the lips, the eyes, you know, that you're not using dark colors that become dead, but that same kind of idea where there's life, that pulse, and it's that warmth that just mimics life inside. Again, you know, the odd thing about flowers, the paradox, is if you hit too many warm notes in there, when things start dying, they start moving towards that warm end, and we associate freshness with something that's on the blue cool end of things. There's, in fact, bleaches tend to have bluing agents that give you the sensation of freshness and liveliness and spring, you know, and it's all these citric, high chromatic colors, you know, but they're, you know, how you get that cool color vibration with the yellows, the reds that we were talking about, the warm, is that interplay. That's where the problem is, because you're working a lot of time in these registers, these values that are so dark. And how do you work in that dark dungeon of deepness, of trying to keep your chroma and keep it alive? So there.
So if you were in your studio alone painting, do you feel like you're more or less progressing at the same rate, or are you going a little bit slower due to the live stream and talking more?
To be honest, this affects me. You know, I'm aware of that camera. I see that green light. You know, so there is that, you know, which I'm not used to. This is my first time doing this type of thing with this. You know, so I do feel it.
And you, again, with the impressionist sentiment and being very connected to emotional reaction and things. I think the artists, I always keep calling you artist, like that's, you know, you don't enjoy like doing tons of marketing because that's not natural. You know, you're an artist. So I think this kind of thing for any artist is always difficult because you're not in your element.
Very true.
You know, and so then there's something thrown in the mix where it's very hard to react the same way.
Yeah, I would say that. It's true. Yeah, this is a little
challenging.
Yeah, challenging. Yeah, it's just it's a bit different. In my studio, and then I listen to music. I am a music kind of guy. You know, some people like silence, but I like music. I'll admit I listen to talk radio sometimes. You know, or whatever. I listen to all kinds of things and all, but whatever gets me going at the time there. But I think it kind of influences me, and if I put on Wagner, you know, you might hear me from the outside, you know, sometimes. So it just it all depends on what I'm after, so, and how I'm feeling. But I'm a little bit more stayed in my approach right now.
Well, I appreciate you coming and doing this. I'm certain our audience is learning a lot, and I'm sure it's fun for them to be able to see the similarities and differences, and also the influence that you've had on me. And
well, it's interesting, and probably is fun because I'm not seeing. I guess you're going back and forth. I would imagine. Are you doing that? Is that what's happening? Right.
Mm-hmm. What?
You're going back and forth between yours and mine, and what we're doing.
So there's a camera on your painting. There's a camera on your palette. Mine is both of my palette. And
but it's flashing all throughout. This kind of notes. Oh, interesting. Yeah. Yeah. It'd be interesting. I wonder. Just even the brush marking. This has changed my way. These. It's funny because I've gone to these long brushes and just moving. It's changed my painting style. Especially when I've been doing a lot more plein air painting, and getting out there, and I just really enjoy that. And for me, it's removing myself completely from any thought of anything else to deal with the end of marketing, selling. It was just having fun out painting nature and just trying to grab hold of a moment, and I like doing that. That's where I'm really happy. And the nice thing, I like Minnesota up there because my favorite times are the cold weather months and November, December, and then the early spring, which is July. No, I mean, it's a long extended season of coldness and all that, but I like the bones of the trees. I like the relation. I like ice and snow. And I like that effect. And
does that come from the dark northeast kind of background that you have, so that feeds into?
I just find the harmonics are really nice. For me, summers are too colorful, too green, too overwhelming, too heavy. Winters are,
It's interesting because you paint it a lot, though. If you go through your website, there's a lot of like greens and.
Oh yeah, well yeah.
I mean, I tend to love your like nocturnes and the winter landscapes and. The florals, of course, but some of the other landscapes where you're just trying to capture the light effect, which you say is oftentimes you're out there kind of trying to just capture that.
Yeah.
So it becomes something. It is what it is. It's like a very bright green day, and.
Yes.
Yeah.
I like the spring. That's one of my favorites. Is when everything kind of lights up, and like I said, chasing the all the different. Seasonal changes. I love the when we get to the crab apples and all the service berries. That's some of my. It's just like I delight in that transition. Everything comes alive and all. And to me, just being out there, it's such a beautiful time in life to be able to do that. But there's something about the winter. And that's what these gray tones, I love these because I painted entire paintings not touching any other pigment but just these gray tones. So on an overcast day where it's kind of funny because you hear people saying, oh, this is miserable out, and everybody says, it's like beautiful to me. I'm out there painting and I got goosebumps because I'm thinking about just being out there and, the icy Minnesota and everything is just, the harmonics are so close, and there's that foil of a white snow against certain things, and you see these forms, and to me that's beautiful, and I love it.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's funny because if you paint it well, people will like it that way. Normally, I've been told that you should not paint winter time. Who wants to look at the winter time? People want to forget that, and I can understand that. But if you're in tune with that and you're passionate and you're in love with it, anything you're in love with, I think you can paint. It doesn't really matter. It's just, people will see that, transmit it.
I've noticed, I'll have to talk to you later maybe about if we could trade. I noticed I tend to lean towards, I have a winter landscape of Mark Delasio, a winter landscape of Rachel Personette, a winter landscape of Brock Larson.
Wow.
And so like for whatever reason, because that's how I grew up,
Oh, yeah.
you know, I grew up in the Midwest, and so
Yeah.
that seems to be like, and you know, talking about connoisseurs and collectors, and they end up, what I've realized from a lot of just kind of meeting people who buy art and asking them is, you end up just buying what you like, you know, and so what is the rhyme or reason behind me gravitating towards winter landscapes? And it just brings back memories that, you know, as you say, I'm in North Dakota a majority of the year, from September to May,
Yeah.
is cold.
Yes.
So, you know, a huge portion of my childhood, like half of it, is in the freezing cold, you know. 9 out of 18 years is like
Yeah.
freezing my butt off.
Yeah. Isn't that funny? Yeah. You're right.
It's funny, Joe got to experience, and on our, maybe tomorrow we could share it, but he got to experience when we were up doing the documentary of Jeff Larson, he got to experience -25.
Oh, yeah, Joe.
Yeah. And we were a little worried about him actually, because he was out there filming and he's like, wants to get this shot. And he's never had frostbite, right? Like it was like dangerously cold, and he was out on the lake. It was all, there was these big ice shards that had kind of shot up out of the lake. And you know, if you're out there and you're cold, it's still another 10 minutes before you get back to the car, and that could make or break a frostbite. So.
Yeah, you're right. It can be really dangerous. You're right,
Yeah.
and you have to dress for it. And there's a lot of things you have to do when you get out there to take care of yourself. You know, but and one of the things I think is you know, this speed I talk about with just being able to produce something quickly. It really, you have to be able to, you know, do it very quickly, and because of the cold. But I think watercolors too, if I could say that, just going back to what I originally said about people doing some and taking watercolor, I think it's very important. I think, you know, in watercolor, the amazing thing about that is you have to be able to at once see value and shape and color.
Yeah.
You know, you can't keep going over it, you kill it. The more you put layers and layers, you can kill your original thing. So watercolor in that sense gives you that ability to be able to see things and ascertain that quickly. So it is a good end, and I'd highly encourage anyone to begin using some watercolors. Try it out. To stay small, you know, I've been teaching watercolor, and lately it seems like everybody wants a full sheet, you know, and start with that. But just small little ones. The British had them really small, 5x7, and James Gurney, you know, that guy just travels with his watercolors, gouaches, you know, and gets out there. But it's really nice to understand and feel your pigments, and then to be able to shape recognize.
It builds confidence too in mark making.
Yeah.
So like if you're gonna put down something, you start to, I haven't done a lot of it, but I was exposed to it early on when I stayed with you, and I've done more of it just if I ever do travel. I have a little travel box, and I like the watercolor gouache because it dries quicker. You know, when you travel, I could do like 4 sketches in a day, right?
Yeah.
And then you have 4 wet oil paintings sitting in your car. But with watercolor and gouache, it's like you can just stack it, put it in your...
Yeah,
you know.
you're absolutely right, yeah. And I just came back from Europe,
Italy,
and I did the same kind of deal. I took my watercolors for that reason. And
I also like that it doesn't stink, you know, like, so for instance, your car isn't full of like these really strong odors of oil paint.
that's a good
So I did a trip around Europe 3 years ago now, and it was for a project that never ended up actually seeing the light of day, but did a lot of sketching, and on the trip I did like 80 paintings.
Oh.
and it was just like all over these beautiful areas, and a lot of it was like tiny oil sketches or watercolor and gouache.
Oh yeah.
And it was a lot of fun. It
Oh,
was
yeah.
really neat. Yeah.
Do you have a preference? I mean, I obviously do a lot more oils,
Yeah.
but do you...
Well, if I'm out and about, I think gouache would be better because it dries quicker. So like right now, I know that I have 3 days, and so some of the effects that I'm waiting to do are down the road. But when
Mhm.
you're out there, I'd rather have it dry quick so I could try to mimic some of those effects on the spot. So I'd prefer watercolor gouache. And you know, just Zorn he's incredible.
Well, I think of the people that I really admire, like him and Sargent, and they both did both. And they hop back and forth. And the amazing thing is they're very similar in both their method of handling things. I found, Sargent, sometimes it's hard to tell the difference. And what I have found, I can understand Sargent's use in oil paint from looking at his watercolors, because he would just abbreviate it. He didn't go back into it, like for the buildings and the forms and that edge between like the sky and a tree or a building. He'd have a blue line or a different chromatic note that he'd just leave in watercolor. You would see it, and you don't always notice that in his oils. He might soften it or bleed that in, and I think that's kind of telling about his thinking process. And then the composition, a lot of those Venice ones that he did, you could just see how he saw it, to me, as a block, a shape that he was just filling in with the information, that way. More of an impressionistic eye to things doing it.
Yeah, it was fun to talk to Jeff when we were visiting him, because I would go back and forth. Like, he would give me a hard time because I talked about making it up often. I'd say like, well, don't worry about it if it changes, just make it up later.
Yeah.
And he'd be like, what am I just, according to Michael, I just need to make stuff up. So he's very much, he like, for his still life, I noticed he has a gray setup, a cloudy day setup, and a sunny day setup.
Oh, I didn't know. Really?
And I just totally ignore the shift and paint kind of more what I'm after. I do it more like Corot in the landscape or something. I'm just kind of going after this whatever I want rather than what it actually looks like.
That's interesting, because I understand that Corot did not paint in the field as much. He painted in the studio, but he would spend time
in the field,
in the field. And so that information became part and parcel of who he was and what he was thinking about and all.
I think Whistler and even I think Fenton, the tour, they were very influenced by memory work. So they trained their visual memory to be such that they could go out and see an evening nocturne and go back to the studio and bring it all back, the feeling and emotion and everything.
That's very interesting, yeah. Are there any questions there? No? All right, we're doing a good job.
Either
or they all left their laptops there.
It's Friday, they took a lunch break. No, I really encourage people to chime in and send us your email, because that that truly is the difference between a DVD and a live stream. Is right now you can ask anything you want about. So if the conversation is going too much about something else and you want a technical question, email us.
That's very good. Yeah. Because we're going to be getting into our family history pretty soon here. Right?
Speaking of, why don't you tell the story about your last name? I thought that was interesting last night. The way you pronounce it and the way that your family once pronounced it. So it's Kochanash?
Oh yeah, Kachanash. yeah. The last name, it's funny because a lot of people ask me, how do you say your last name? And I always, well, I've been saying, I don't know. You know, but I've been saying Kachanash and no one's corrected me yet, so I think that's the way you say it. But I believe that when I was a kid and I went to school, I'm Ukrainian and I went to parochial school, and we would say the Our Father, and the Our Father in Ukrainian is Ochinash, and I always thought it was my name, you know, and so that's why we began every day. We would say my name and all that, which I was really proud of, and I thought was pretty cool until I realized that it was Kochinash. You know? But you know, so anyway, I that's kind of is that what you were talking about there? With just that, just the oddity of it.
So you say Kachanash. How did your grandfather and you know.
Well, they were all my family. They died pretty early.
Really?
But I don't have longevity to my family's name here. So, but what I remember of the way people pronounced it, it was more Kochinash. The way they would say it. When in the Ukrainian, they would say. But I did have a professor, Russian professor, or professor of Russian. I don't know. He was related. He was a professor that came in and was impressed with my name and knew it and recognized it as. And he told me the name itself meant something very endearing type of father. And he said it's a very
so that ties
beautiful
into
name.
the Ochinash.
Yeah. So that's very nice. But you know, yeah, I think that with this ancestry and all that, it's kind of interesting that we can find out so much more of our heritage and all that now. But
yeah,
Klein is pretty simple there.
it's we are Germans who came over from Russia.
Oh, you too. Huh?
So there was
I knew there was something about you.
German.
Yeah.
German village in Russia, went over to London, came over to Montreal, and then down through into North Dakota.
Oh, okay.
Through Canada into North Dakota, and then they settled land they were given land in North Dakota. Or you know, you could argue and say it was stolen and given.
Yeah.
So.
So I'm going into back into those dark notes. I gotta reset. What I like to do is, you know, sometimes, and I'm holding back, and I'm not doing that right now. I would actually take this off, pop it down, or move my easel.
Take what off?
I move it around. I flip it around a lot, you know, to be able to soften things, to see how. In fact, I might do that.
You can do it.
Yeah, because
they can always switch. I would say try to keep the angle of the easel more or less the same.
Okay.
And you can do whatever you want.
But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to actually flip it upside down, and doing this helps me. You know what? Let me get rid of this thing on my arm. But yeah, that kind of helps me to see things there. Yeah. So I'm going to just work a little bit this way.
So let's talk a little bit about. So one thing that people always ask me is about squinting, and I tell them I don't squint anymore, but I used to squint and throw my eyes out of focus, and that was something that you taught me, to throw my eyes out of focus and see the color notes.
Yeah.
And so that's you can talk a little bit about why you do that, and I can kind of try to explain my position.
Well, again, the out of focus, you're not looking at the thing as it is. You know, you're looking at relationships. You know, you're really just you're generalizing what all those cumulative pixels of color coming back to you are saying and doing. When you throw your eyes out of focus, that becomes it subordinates all the detail, and then it fuses together a lot of that information into an overall note. So for example, all these petals that are darks and lights and all, I can throw my eyes out of focus and I could see, you know, their relationship a lot better as far as how can I simplify that to be able to put that down. So that's kind of why I throw my eyes out of focus, and I think that's a really good practice to be able to develop that sense of being able to see things. I keep going back to seeing things not as they are for what they are. I think it's more to do with seeing it as a color value note. I talk about that all the time, so that's why I do it. And what I'm doing here is I just want to kind of simplify my background. It's just actually this light here at the angle it is
I don't
giving
know
me
if
a
they
little
can
bit.
see it. And Joe's, I don't know if this camera is.
Oh, I'll just stand back. I'm just kind of softening and fusing that together back here. Oh, is that the camera?
It would probably be caught with that one if you. How is this? Hey, can you see what he's doing on this one?
So I'm just going to soften. You know, I have to put more paint on this side here. So then this. And I'll go this way a little bit.
What camera is it on right now? What do you guys have it on?
Right now it's on Twitch.
Okay.
Trying to switch it to right now it's just glitching.
The app's kind of freezing. The live stream's fine.
Okay.
But the app is glitching.
Okay. Because of the iPad.
Switch it off.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, I'm going to flip it back. It was just to do that in the background, so that was just it. I just kind of take my squeegee and kind of go each way along the lines of the grain there to just kind of simplify it. And then I'll work back into it, but it kind of softens that. Let me work this back up here.
Did you ever use a palette knife to scrape the background?
I used to use a palette knife, and that used to take off too much, you know. So that's why I like this squeegee here. It kind of accomplishes what I'm looking for a lot more effectively. So. We heard you. No. And yeah, these that's kind of funny because you were talking about Jeff and making things up. It's the one thing is that these leaves, I've been kind of delaying putting information you know there because I'm waiting for that to kind of come back to life, but it doesn't seem to be doing it. So
So people know we took the picture last night.
Yeah.
In the flower, the green's really wilted. And so that's what Rick is referencing there. And so our audience knows, I believe we're having a little technical difficulty still. Minor. It's the app.
It has splits from the both of your campuses.
It is.
Stream itself is fine.
So to explain what's going on is we switched our system to an app to allow split screen, and there's a glitch in the app, correct? Yeah, so that's why it's, yeah. And so we're on Rick's painting and my painting?
Yeah.
Okay, so we can keep talking and all right. All right. So at this point, I mean, for me, if I was in the studio by myself, I mean, if we're about 2 hours in, I probably would be close to the end for my block-in.
Yeah.
And so when I think of the block-in, I think of getting the composition figured out
Yeah.
and getting the notes, the color that I want down.
Mm-hmm.
So something like this, you know, that would go back to the idea of like a color note.
Mhm.
haven't rendered that out yet. But I save all those things for.
That color note is not there, right? You're making that one
which
up, or-
one? This one?
Or is that the
That's
row
the real
there?
bright orange one.
Wait, that.
This.
Okay, yeah.
So
Oh, all right.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I've played it down because I'm uncertain if I want to maybe play this one out and leave that a little bit
Okay.
less. So for the beginning stages, my goal is to get thick paint, fresh paint, transparencies, build up all those differences. The chroma, I want neutral paint, I want, things that set it up for, then I can tweak it into position. That's
And-
kind of the goal.
Do you work back into a wet surface then? Is it?
Parts may be wet tomorrow, but for the most part, I think it'll suck into the lead ground and it'll dry. The lead ground will absorb it and dry it up. But then I'll also use oil. So as I proceed, then you start to use more and more oil, and that doesn't, the Gamsol would cut into my painting, but the oil is going to rest on top of the painting. So even if it is slightly tacky, the oil will then just kind of go right over top of it, rather than if I go back in with turp, it would pull it up.
Yeah. That's,
Yeah, right.
So that's
But it's a
fat
medium
over
issue.
lean. Yeah.
Right.
And then the oil you're talking about is what oil?
It's the oleo gel, but I haven't used it yet today.
Yeah. Okay. So you reserve that till later.
For the
Okay.
second and third day, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And myself, what? It varies. When we were saying about how long I would work, we talked about this. We got 2 bouquets for me
Yeah,
because
yeah.
I didn't know. I tend to work, and I get a lot of things done at once. I mean, I was going to be actually thinking of a smaller canvas. We started off,
Okay, right.
and then there's a little bit larger canvas, a little bit more floral here, but that's fine. But I try to really do them pretty much in one breath and set them down. That's my latest working style, is to get as much information down and paint it up. Like I say, oftentimes I don't touch them again, but then again, a lot of times I do, and it varies on the painting. So, and like I say, I take a picture in the beginning, a picture at the end, and then I have an understanding of where things are, and if I want to be able to modify things.
Right.
And a lot of it is just like little drawing things that I find. I have the information down. I just need to come back and to finish rendering things up. I have, suggestions, like I'm just going to come with my wedge and be able to throw in a few of these things, like these little petals radiating out like that, and I'll put a few notes down. I have this, which I'm going to use then later for, this kind of thing. But a lot of times though, I come back and paint, and I didn't know what I was going to do here and how this would work for our timing purposes here. So what I'm going to do is, as we discussed, I'll have this one rendered up, and I'm going to start on the second bouquet, do one tomorrow, and then I'll pick one of these and finish it off, like you're doing the next day, because most of my paintings I don't revisit that often to come back to.
And if the bouquet is changed
significantly,
will that be an obstacle?
I forgot that part. Yeah, and that's a big part of it, is because things do not remain the same, and they change so much. I don't fabricate, and I think that comes back, and you can see that from the lineage of Jeff. You mentioned about Jeff. You were talking about Jeff Larson, right?
Yep.
Yeah, and that's kind of the way I think of things too. With the atelier training, we were pretty much painting what we saw. We didn't vary things too much. So making up things was not something. Oh,
Yeah.
I remember.
The goal was to be very truthful to the light effect.
Yes,
The light effect that was occurring in front of you.
absolutely.
And so then that gets into the idea of so I think people in New York would say the same thing. They would say, well, we're trying to be very truthful to the light effect that's occurring, right? So there are 2 different mentalities and 2 different kind of there's so many different ways of doing it, but particularly, and then you have the Florence school and what they think about. And so,
And where are they at?
well, they were so Daniel Graves and Charles Cecil, but I think that it was somehow influenced by I want to say like Anagonian lac was the original kind of offshoot of that.
Is that the Richard Lack?
So one, Dan Graves, I think, was influenced by Richard Lack, and I think Charles Cecil, or I know John Angel was, Anagoni's. So there, I don't know what the background is for them, but it's kind of a blend of, and every time, I mean, it happens at Jacob's School, every time someone comes in who's really talented, it shifts it a little bit.
Yeah, that's the cool thing, yeah, like cross-pollination.
Yeah, so like back in the day at the Grand Central Atelier, which was Water Street back then, it was like Michael Grimaldi and Kate Lehman and Sarah Lamb and Travis Schlott were a lot of the influences back at Water Street.
Now, is that Kate that came from Burnsville? Was she at Burnsville?
She was there, yeah.
Okay, I remember her at Burnsville, yeah.
So you taught Kate a little bit? Or
no, she wasn't in my classes. I think she was just, I don't know why I never...
She was friends with Jeff's mom.
She was what?
Friends with Jeff's mother.
Oh, is that right? Okay.
So then, you know, and then obviously now the influence from Grand Central Atelier is Colleen Barry and Will St. John and Jacob and Ted, and there was a time period when it was influenced by Josh LaRock and Scott Waddell, and so they just, I think you have to take it with a grain of salt, any kind of like lineage talk.
Mm-hmm.
That like, I'm totally different than Jacob, so even though I studied with him, you know, and I'm different than you, so it's not, the lineage thing, you can only see the influences, it doesn't really help understand.
That's a good point. I think that's a very good point. And nowadays, with every YouTube, video you can watch,
yeah.
and
I mean, Alex is a perfect example of that. So now Alex, who's here, he is from a generation where he's kind of self-taught. So he used to watch videos of Lip King and anyone, and like slow them down and watch what they were doing. And so then he was influenced by us and Daniel Sprick and Jeff Hine. But for the most part, he did a lot of searching and on the internet.
Interesting, isn't it? Yeah, geez, that's fascinating. Wow. That's, it's funny, I'll just say it, that I can't tell you how many people walk up to me about Bob Ross. You know Bob Ross on TV?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, they'll tell me, they do the mountains. And they show me, though. They have it on their phone. I just had a guy this week that just showed me these mountains.
Oh, he showed you?
Yeah, he had pictures of it there, and he's really proud. He says, "You're not doing too bad." He said, "Here's my mountains," and he just showed it. I really like the guy. He's really... But, what's kind of funny is one thing, and I said this upstairs, too, is that I think that the joy, the passion, if you're really into it, I think the joy of painting comes through, and it should be a lot of fun to be able to.
Yeah.
You just get lost in it, and that's what you don't want to lose. There is that spark that really drove you to do it.
Yeah.
But I get a kick out of that. I think that's pretty funny.
I started watching Bob Ross videos when I was like 8. I had my own little setup in the garage.
Oh yeah? Yeah?
Yeah.
How were your mountains?
Well, probably better than what you're doing now.
oh yeah. Okay. All right. Well, there you go.
Now you happy little trees.
Yeah. No, when I first started with Jacob, it was funny because he was very interested in Bob Ross. Like truly interested because he saw a connection to the Hudson River School and the formulas of the Hudson River School, and he was thinking that Bob Ross was an offshoot of like really bad, some secrets from the Hudson River School. And so he thought like the way the trees are made with the fan brush, there was a lot to that, and the way the clouds are softened with the wide 2-inch, you know. And so we were watching videos of Bob Ross at Jacob's place, and I can't remember who came. Someone came, and it was like their first week, and they were like, I came to New York, and these guys are watching Bob Ross videos.
Yeah, that's pretty good. I like that.
Yeah, so Bob Ross is, I mean, there's something to it. Like you said earlier, when we talked about the, you know, the tool of the rubber brush is actually a formula thing.
Oh yeah, you're right.
And so that's closer to like Bob Ross, in the sense that.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm with you 100%. You kind of almost resist saying that I was doing that and not bringing it, but I thought, well, why not? You know, and these longer brushes that I'm using too, I don't know, I just like the longer brushes now, and I didn't think I would like them. It happened that they were actually on clearance at Jerry's Autorama. I don't know if I'm allowed to say, you know, that, but they were all no longer in available, so I think I bought them all up. So anyway, I did buy a lot of brushes, but I liked them. You know, all of a sudden I just fell in love with them. I like to stand back and to use these brushes. I think that they really worked for what I was enjoying here. So
the story behind these rosemary brushes is I wanted to switch. So the one that I gave you a while back of the Langley, I wanted to switch because my brushwork was similar to a lot of the stuff that was being done. So Richard Schmid, Jeremy Lipking, because they were using that same brush. And so I figured the easiest way to rebrand whatever I was doing was just to switch the brush. Because as soon as you switch a brush, it changes your painting, you know.
Well, that's a good point, yeah.
So a lot of the brushwork that you see in my flower paintings, it's this kind of twisty, turny, it's this soft synthetic brush that I'm using that allows me to kind of put the paint on in a way that you know, can mimic a petal a certain way. And so it goes back to that. That I still think that that's a valid. It's actually more of the academic sentiment. It's a valid expression when you're figuring out formulas to then get the result that you want.
Are there any questions or anything?
I had a question and a request, which I was going to
okay.
run past you. So someone's just asked for a quick request of like seeing the bouquets as they are now. So I might be able to just give them a quick shot on the cameras of what they're like now, because obviously they've changed a bit from the photos. But we'll sort that out in a sec. But Marianne Innes has asked, she's wondering how much Rick thinks in terms of temperature. Heat.
I think it's pretty warm in here. That's why I'm okay. But I know I do think a lot of temperature. I do. I don't know if you noticed that, but I think outside, again, the plein air, I mentioned about watercolor. I think plein air is another one where I encourage my students to get outside and paint, because I think that's a instruction room, you know, to get out there and it beats you up, you know, because it's so hard and it has such a vast range. And the one thing you see out in nature is temperature. You know, you see the sun and you see the shadows, the things not in the sun, and it separates things. So when you come into the studio, you have a smaller portion of the same thing happening. Your light source is going to dictate the temperature. And for years, you know, for a long time, we used incandescents inside. So you have warmer lights and cooler shadows. And nowadays with these LEDs, you could get the whole range, and this is pretty cool light that we're getting here. But I do think a lot about temperature. You know, not that it's in the forefront of my mind, but I am, you know, I am turning this from a warmer note to a cooler note. Now, what's kind of funny here is like here, it's warmer again because I think this light is bouncing back into it. And when you get bounce back light, you get a little warmth again. I started coming inside of here with some tones that are these red tones here. I started with this red and wanted to correct it because it was a little bit too warm. But I wanted to get a cooler note inside of there because it's buried within that light there. So, yeah, I don't know if that answers it correctly, but yes, I do think about that. Do you think about it?
I think about the color wheel more than temperature. So like before it was lighter, darker, warmer, cooler, so temperature is in my mind. But I think about it more as where does it shift? So it would be a warmer, cooler thing basically because yellows and oranges and reds feel warmer, and blues and violets and reds can feel cooler. But I'm more searching for the kind of quality of the hue and the saturation of the hue than of the, you know, we call it temperature, you know, we relate things to
Warm and cool.
Warm and cool, yeah, that's just another way of saying like a certain kind of blue.
Well, here's a question for you, and I wonder, how do you see like ultramarine blue, which is a red blue, compared to cerulean or phthalo, which is a yellow blue? Which one's warmer and which one's cooler to you? Yeah, I mean, if you...
Yeah, the red blue.
Is what?
Cooler.
I'll give you time to think about
so
it.
So the cerulean is warmer. The cerulean is warmer. In my mind.
Really? I see. It's funny. Anybody could pipe in. It's funny. I think of it just the opposite, but I've heard it different ways. Do you think? Yeah. It's not funny because I've noticed people
warm,
think of it
sunny
different.
day, green grass is closer to cerulean than the.
Well, if it's transmitting the light.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's what brings warmth to my mind.
That brings shadow. Cool. I think of the transmission of light is in a cooler notch. It's.
Okay.
But, you know, but not really. I should take that back. But it would be in the shadow. But it's funny. The reason I ask is if it does come to temperature, I think there's without a doubt, you know, orange compared to quinacridone or rose pink. You know, there's no doubt about the warm and the cool. Yellows, definitely, we know. But then blue, you get factions, you know, and each side is carrying signs and saying, you know, down with the, you know, the one side says that they feel like you, that the warmth is with the red, the ultramarine, where I feel totally different. Wait, did I say that right? Yeah, I said, yeah, the warmth that I see with the ultramarine, and then warmth cool with the cerulean, because I think of it icier. But so here we go. We'll have an online survey. Can they feedback of how many say one way or the other? That'll be interesting. Yeah. Can we do that? That'd be interesting to just have them respond and see if they're actually sitting there or they're asleep. This is a quiz, a pop quiz. How about that? Take out a piece of paper, put your name in the upper right-hand corner. He probably doesn't communicate to you. I had to do a demo out of high school, and I did that to the kids. I came in there. And that's what we would always have as a pop quiz when I was young. You know, the teacher would come in and say, yeah, take out a piece of paper, put your name in the upper right-hand corner. And you knew you cleared your desk, that was a pop quiz, you know. Yeah. So I did that to the kids as a joke when I was asked to demonstrate. And they all just sat there. They didn't know, it didn't communicate at all. It's like, and not even the teacher. It was like, that was one of those jokes that just fell flat.
Make you feel.
And I'm up there smiling and thinking it was so funny, hilarious. Wasn't that funny? Yeah, it was like, okay. So it didn't start my lecture very well in there. The kids just, So that would be interesting if anybody wanted to respond. I think that would be cool to know what people think.
And for those who are not viewing live, because we've noticed a lot of people will purchase this and because of their schedule, or if they're in another part of the world and they're sleeping right now, and then they can chime in later. You can send in a question and maybe we'll try to address it tomorrow if you're watching tonight or later.
Yeah.
We've got a question from Taylor Hitchcock asking, what do you personally separate a good flower painting from a great one?
It's tough.
It sounds like one for Michael to answer.
Well, I can speak into, I just went and saw a Manet show in Chicago. And there have been times in my life where I would have said that a Manet painting is a bad painting. But I liked them, and my wife enjoyed some of the floral paintings in the show. And so it all comes back to the idea that you have a chance to express yourself, and some people will respond to it and some people won't. And you shouldn't worry about the ones that aren't. If you're communicating something to someone and they find it inspiring, you just have to roll with the punches. Sometimes paintings come in and out of fashion, and you may be famous one day and not the next, so you just have to be prepared for that. And you shouldn't worry so much about how. So like there is no answer basically. You can't give a straight answer to that question. That's my 2 cents.
That's good. Yeah.
Do you agree with that?
Well, yeah. Well, the short answer is my signature on it. That's one quick way to know. But outside of that, I think I would say that it is difficult. What I think, to me, flowers. You know, it's funny because I thought about this before about floral. Fake ones, fake flowers. I don't know if you ever use fake flowers, the artificial flowers, I should say. I
have, but it affected greatly the painting.
Well, they've gotten a lot better, though. I think there's an amazing change. And I think it was going for the plastics and resins or whatever to these materials. I don't know what they're doing now, but they've gotten better. But it was like, even though the detail may be there, the breadth of it isn't, and that's, I think of, there was a show with a Whistler a while back, and it had that word breath in it. I forget what the name of this, do you know what I'm talking about? The breath of...
The title of the painting?
The show. It had, Whistler it was a lot of nocturnes, but it was the breath of evening or something like that. It was the name. But it was like, flowers to me have this almost like what do you want to say? Like a phosphor. I think that because of what you were saying there about that light scattering and then the light transmitting through there. There's and then the surfaces are multifaceted. It's like a diamond. The soft diamond, that it has this glowing, phosphoring, and they're alive, and that's, if it communicates that to me, that's what I would consider well done. Like a Manet and his brevity, what he did, I liked them. They were really, directly put in there with not much. I think Fantin Latour, incredible painter, but there's something about that it communicates that sense of that flower so well. Those different planes and facets that give out that light. You sense that so well. So it has if it does that for me, that's the way I would.
Is that the same for like the landscape as well?
Well, probably is. Yeah. Well, you know what? But there's something about flowers that is totally different, though. I don't know what it is exactly, but the form they're they have, you know, to me, the characteristics, I used to think of male and female just as far as there's a delicacy and yet there's a strength. They possess both. There's a boldness there. There's these, you know, we were talking about the folds of drapery and all that. I think of when sculptors are doing it, the rendering of that, the strength of those folds, like those Rodins, you know, and then you have those straight planes with a little bit of curvature, and that the curves are made up of the straight lines. And the flowers do more or less the same thing, you know, they're not just all rounded and puffy. They have that interplay between the both of them, and there's, you know, then that's another thing about them, and I think that might have something to do with it. Maybe that can be thought through a little bit more.
Look, question a couple of votes in.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So one question, Marianne is awake and watching because she's asked, where's that blue you've snuck onto your palette that you've not got on your materials list?
Oh, this one here?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. That's very good. Shades. Number one, kudos to her.
Really?
Yeah, that's very good. You noticed that. Well,
you cheater.
Yeah.
You haven't used it yet, though.
I have not touched it. Yeah.
I believe the only blue on the list is ultramarine.
Yeah. Well, then this is the gray blue, and I didn't talk about my gray white. The blue, the violet, the purple, and the blue of the grays is here. That's gray blue.
That's what I was thinking, yeah.
Yeah, so that's the gray blue.
Those are the 12 shades.
Yeah, that's the 12 shades of gray that I use. So there's 10 of them here and 2 here. But this one here I put out with the thought of looking at that. I was thinking I might use that in the background with an orange, and I thought that would be something I was going to vibrate, which would give me a nice kind of, it's actually a cool blue. It's that yellow blue. And this one being a warm one here, right? So anyway, I wanted to use that with the warm, and that vibration I thought would be something I'd be picking on here. And I didn't use it. And the one thing I didn't talk about my palette, there's a couple things I want to say about the, can I say? There's the paint arrangement. You know, I put out just little dabs of color, and I know that, you know, everybody says don't be chintzy with your paint and put out the paint. And I first find out what I end up dabbing into, and then I've been adding to it and putting more out there. I feel, why put it out there if I'm not going to use it? I see it there. If I start using it more, then I put out more paint. So that's number one. You know, for me, I just put all my keys out there, and there are a whole bunch. But then I usually, for certain paintings, I'll just kind of restrict myself. As I see myself grabbing across, I'll stay within a certain area. So I haven't touched this blue, I haven't touched this one, you know, and none of these, you know. That's funny, I haven't touched the blues out here. I've been mainly using the grays to make any cooler note. The second thing is this white. You know, I put this bead of white, like toothpaste, along the front, instead of one dab of white. And the reason I do that is, you could see I could pull along and keep my white clean. I figure all these white, you're dabbing in white a lot, and then you could see it just kind of explodes to the red, the yellows, you know. So I'll just pull it down like that, and that way I can keep it clean with a streak of it instead of that. So my paints, mainly though, you could see these were longer beads in the beginning, and I've been actually using a lot of this mid-gray here, but I'll add back into my piles and all that. And you know, like this yellow I hardly use, maybe a little bit, but it's funny, I don't use, do you find you use all your paints in every time? Is it pretty much combination? Or?
No, yeah, I gravitate towards certain things. Yeah. Speaking into that idea of the white, in this particular painting, I don't have a lot. I'm hovering in the midtones. But I always tell students that when you do mix white, you have to pull it out of that spot. So if I were to finish just to kind of, there's both ideas, and it's actually, when you were talking about that, it's interesting to look at your palette to see how similar some of the, I noticed across the board, like back in the day I used to travel and do some videoing of people, and so I was able to see people mix for the first time, and I noticed a lot of these artists that I was videoing, they mixed in a similar way. So they were very energetic with the paint, and they were very comfortable with the paint, as whereas students are like, it's a little blah blah this, a little blah blah that, and a little blah blah that. And so when I go back to, if I'm up at the top of the scale, I would grab a bunch of white and I would make sure to pull it out and start a new section so that, but you're doing the same by pulling that string across. You're just doing it early.
Oh yeah, okay.
You're doing it at the onset. Whereas I just grab it and I make sure to blast out a section of light so I have a big area of white. So sometimes in my palettes you'll see like this huge section of white. And it's because of that. It's to keep it clean, and I just keep grabbing white and I spread out. And so.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's good.
But like Jacob paints in a very similar way with the mixtures of the paint.
Yeah.
And it was Daniel Sprick. I don't know if you didn't know his work, but just very fluid with the paint and very.
Oh yeah, I know. I'm familiar with
Mm-hmm.
it. Well, the one thing, what do you think of this? People ask me a lot about the palette setup. And at one point what I did was, I remember I had a notebook when I was a student, and every time people would talk about their palette, I had cut out a little shape of a palette, you know, as a template, and I would put their colors. And I had, you know, page after page of all these palettes that people had. And I realized there were so many ideas about a palette that when people ask me, I tell them the thinking behind mine, but to stay consistent. You know, once you pick something, try to stay. Don't one day, you know, decide you're going to put red and then flip it around and all over. But you know, so you know where it is. And there was another thought there, or two parts of this, and I forgot. But yeah, so the one was definitely to stay. Oh, and to put them around the perimeter. I don't know if you see some people put paint all over the place, and it's like. To have structure so that it's on the outside, so it makes sense. Now, when I'm working at home, what I have is I have a glass palette. It's a really long piece of glass, and mine actually curves from the red. You know, I have, you know, like I said, my red, green, and then I have orange to the blue area here, and then I come up to the yellow, and then the violet, purple up here, and then all in the center are all my gray. So you know, everything moves towards the center, towards the gray, and when I'm reaching towards the chromatic end, it strikes towards that pigment. You know, I'm trying to hit. You know, so that's kind of the way but you know, everything
in the center would be the neutrals.
Yeah,
and so you expand out towards
So everything works its way out, and if you folded my palette in half, conceivably, you mix it, it would all turn gray because the colors are opposite. But that's kind of the way
Have you tested the colors? So that was something that back in the day, I think you had. So you tested them, because I tell people that if you're going to think complementary colors, you have to test it to make sure they're actually complementary. Because you can mix a blue and an orange, and it could get a violet instead of if it's not a perfect.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and sometimes you have to adjust it, but yeah, it's basically those ends. But you're right. There's so much. What do they call it? Pigment deviation and all that. There's additives and things that it kind of knocks you off, and you end up not so much with a gray, but a warmer tone. Oftentimes, you know, around that. But that, you know, a lot of times I'm not going for the gray itself, so I'm just trying to knock off that chromatic edge. But that's a good point. Yeah, you want it, and yeah, I say I would think that's very important. When I was a student, you know, but I spent a lot of times too with my watercolors doing that type of testing, and then I actually when I taught my color classes, we would do exactly that thing where we tried to see about the grays, and I had people just do a wheel, and that was the whole idea. And what's across the way from there?
Yeah, I remember.
And,
that.
yeah, so it was very important. That's a good point to know exactly what is that you're shooting across from.
Because I don't, so you use complementary colors and now the 12 shades of gray to get the neutrals, but I travel down to the primary color. So in other words,
You call this the primary color.
Yeah, the primary neutral. So like if I'm in the, up in the yellow, I would go yellow to raw sienna to raw umber, and it desaturates and gets darker.
Right.
Blue would be, ultramarine and white would be the high note, cobalt, blue, and then ultramarine blue, and then black for the neutral blue. Red would be burnt umber, burnt sienna, alizarin and magenta, magenta and white, and then that's it.
Yeah, you're traveling towards a cool, I noticed. Cool top
Well,
line.
they're not here.
Well, I think magenta's being...
Well, no, so that's the red.
Yeah, right. But I'm just saying on all of them, it seemed like you're moving towards a cooler. Your blue was...
On the yellow. Because the yellow is raw umber, raw sienna, cad yellow pale. And cad yellow pale is kind of the orange yellow rather than the cool yellow. Because if I mix cad yellow pale with viridian, then it goes to the cool lemony yellow.
Yeah, you're right. Okay.
So on that one, I'm staying in the orange,
Yeah.
the warm.
Okay. Well, that was good. That was instructive. I know, by the way, for that person, I never said what color that was. That's cerulean blue.
What?
Cerulean blue. Cerulean. Yeah, that's
Okay.
Yeah, cerulean.
Yeah, I took that. I had that on back in the day. Yeah, right.
I'm hoping for a political career here, so I don't answer that question.
How much time do we have as far as the
We've got
whole?
20 minutes.
20 minutes? Oh, gosh.
All right. Great.
So we had 2 votes
Oh,
for the temperature. The first, from Ellen Taylor, she said ultramarine feels cooler to me.
Mm.
I don't know who's that was in alignment with.
all right.
And then Trish Mitchell, who's watching from Cape Town, said the cerulean blue feels warm.
So that's
So that
2 wins in my corner.
No, that's 2. That was each one of each, right?
No.
Ultramarine blue and cerulean blue.
Oh,
So the
One was cool.
blue,
oh, she said. Oh, yeah. So that was 2 for you.
yeah.
Wow.
I'm teasing.
The world
You
is falling
said
apart.
you said
Well,
ultra-
Louis is with me.
Oh really? Okay. Oh, so you said ultramarine blue and alizarin was warm to you. That was what you said. You
No,
added
alizarin blue
or
would be-
just
Alizarin
just
blue-
ultramarine. So not with the alizarin.
Well, not with alizarin, because I think of alizarin being a cool red. But as far,
Okay. Right.
that's a good point. I never think when you go, because that would go from alizarin is a cool red blue, or about blue red, but then you move.
So that's so.
Oh, that's
Here
interesting.
I have, so this is a warm red, my burnt sienna. This is a cool red, which is the alizarin. Magenta can be warm if you add orange. Like I took cad red off my palette because I use magenta and orange now for the cad red.
Right. Okay.
But so in between, cobalt blue and magenta is the cobalt violet, et cetera, et cetera. So, this to me, burnt sienna is a really warm red. And it goes into the orange and the yellows. And then they just keep swinging around. So the yellow and the blue is the green. That's why I have the green there. So this is just a color wheel, but my neutrals are down here.
Yeah. Well, see, and I would say, purples. Purples to me, and I remember reading this too, is from whatever source I was reading it, that purple, which is where we are when we're talking about alizarin sliding into the blue component, we're going through purples. Purple can lean either warm or cool. It's, to me, that's the line that you're formulating. If you're going from warm to cool colors, you got the bluish, and then you definitely got the warmish. So as you're as you're doing that, if we do it in a linear fashion and say the warms are over here and the cools are over here, then that purple
Can be warm.
can be, if it's
Yeah,
the purple's leaning one way or leaning the other way.
Yeah.
But
And so that would be useful, the Munsell system would be useful for that, because you could say that such and such chip is actually a warm, because it starts to pull over into this area. So it's a good, to explain which color you're actually referencing, that's what that system is good for.
Yeah. Well, I think another good color system is Gamblin has that color, what's he call it? A color space. Have you ever seen that online? Gamblin paints. He has this this disc. It looks like a donut with a value scale from light to dark. Munsell basically.
Yeah,
and then he has all the colors lined up on the outside, and then moving towards the inside, losing chroma. So it's
just one cross section of the Munsell.
Well, he has it's actually a disc like a hockey puck. It has a dimension. So you have from light or tire wheel, car tire. It isn't a flat disc. It has form, and I like that. He talks about mixing through that and talks about the color space, and I kind of think that's a really good one for people to look at, because I use that when I'm teaching color to show people that, because it kind of has that middle part of your tints and your shades, going through there. So and then your chromatic colors are outside, and they're not all lined up on one plane, because your yellows are higher, your greens and blues are down lower, at their optimum hue. So your values are traveling up and down.
So the idea of the Munsell system too, just to reiterate that it's valuable, but I don't prescribe to it much, is if I mixed out all of the, much like the Richard Schmid system, where if I mixed out all of the colors and how they interact with one another, then I would actually have my palette in a Munsell system. So the actual system of color is greater. Like if I'll realize the limitations of my palette. If I were to do the Richard Schmid thing, that's like basically a Munsell system of your own palette. So then if you want to mix, if I want to add cerulean to then mix cerulean and viridian, I'm going to get a higher chroma, some kind of bluey green that I couldn't get with ultramarine and viridian.
Yeah, right.
So there's just, you have to understand the limitation of your palette. If you want to hit a certain note, you have to be able to add it, or then you have to understand how to get down to the middle. And I think that's where a lot of people struggle. It's like, how do you make a neutral? It's not just mixing a bunch of mud. You should actually know how to get to a neutral.
That's a very good point. Yeah. I totally feel that's a good way of thinking. All right.
Got a question for you, Michael.
Okay.
From Ben King.
Yeah.
I don't know where he is.
Yeah.
But he says, earlier in your painting, you mentioned you were setting up the space and atmosphere around the floral arrangement as an initial step. I'm wondering to what extent a sense of atmosphere or 3D space has affected the development of the subject that each painting has progressed.
Yeah. So every brush stroke, I'm thinking about the space. So if I do, if I have a green, and you'll see me put down dark notes sometimes. So imagine this being a scale, this is a sphere. Then I'm down here in my dark greens, and I'll put something down first, dark, and then I'll slide up the scale, and I'll reiterate that space, and I'll say, well, the light falls a certain way on that, so now I have a shadow and a light. So those are two notes that I'm particular about. And so like here, at the very beginning of the painting, I had the background note and I had the cast shadow of the vase. I was conceiving of the background space as a it's a mid kind of neutral green, blue kind of thing. So you establish that, and then I went to my shadows, and you create a cast shadow, and that's another neutral because it could tip a certain way, and so you put that in. So I'm hitting a note in the background, I'm hitting a note in the shadow. It's very similar to if I mix a note for the green, and etc. etc. I do it every time I'm over here. I'm thinking about form and color relationships. So if I'm up in the lights, it either is highly chromatic or it starts to desaturate into the whites. So, but in the shadows, if it were a situation where you're feeling a lot of color in the shadows, that would be like a viridian and a red, where it's some other kind of vibration that you're going after. But typically in my shadows, I just start going down to these neutrals. And so I'll have a neutral yellow with a high chroma green, and it's the note that I would put down. But I go back and forth all the time on every color. I have a string usually from dark to light. So I'm always conceiving of that space, every brush stroke. And it's always, no matter what I do, it's at the forefront of my mind. So here you see these. This side, it's transmitted light kind of popping through it, and it's diffused reflection here. So this side's darker, this side's lighter. I would have slid around on the scale to get that effect. Here, this is darker. It has a bunch of those neutrals from the background. This is more chromatic up through here. So I would make sure to try to get some orange and reds. But then this is a light pink that gets up into the whites. And so I'm positioning myself chroma and value all together, thinking about the space all the time, carving into it. So.
Deborah Paris has said the show Bridget mentioned is like breath on glass.
That's it.
Tonalism.
Yeah, that's it. Tonalism. That's it.
There you go.
Thank you, Deborah.
Yeah. Oh, that was a very good show. Wow. That was very good. Oh.
I wonder if anyone's seen the Van Gogh movie. Have you seen it?
No.
It's the new one.
Yeah,
Is it very new?
I think so. I don't know if it's out, but I saw the trailer for it. It looked interesting.
Oh, really? I didn't even hear about it. Okay.
Have you ever seen the Tim's Vermeer?
Yeah, I saw that.
What did you think of that?
And the girl with the golden earring?
Well, just the Tim's Vermeer was the one that was the hypothesis or theory or whatever of the
box.
how he did it.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. Yeah, that was kind of interesting.
Where are we talking about?
Yeah, I thought there was a lot to it that was valuable. It kind of plays into the photo issue, but at the same time, it's like comparing a hyperrealist today to someone who works from life and gets a lot of detail. The Tim's Vermeer is like the hyperrealist. You can get a lot from that particular kind of idea. So a hyperrealist can get a lot off of copying a photo, but they're not Rembrandt.
Right.
And so Vermeer, whether or not he used the system, he's Vermeer. I mean, he's not copying. He's not sitting there just twiddling away trying to copy these little notes that he sees in a mirror. It's just much easier just to look at it. I think he would have been fascinated by it. Fascinated by the idea that you can simplify things, and this mechanism was allowing him to experience that. But I don't think he would have sat there and actually copied it. It's like, if you know how to draw really well, would you rather trace or draw?
Well, no, I'm agreeing with you. But he did stay within the range of proportions, ratios. I mean, that's where they got the feeling of how he did that, right? I mean, the optics of the whole thing, the setup, that map, the tile floor, the window, all the stuff. He was careful to render that. But the one thing I think about, he used that additive light because he would use a lot of combinations of colors that would optically, give you neutrals, like his walls in the background, or combinations of optical, like a blue with a type of yellow base, ochre, soft, vibrate, and give you a negative that you would think. We talked about this at the museum, that blues and yellows actually used in their proper ratios. Certain ones give you optical gray.
Yeah.
rather than a green.
Yeah, that's, what comes to mind that's fascinating, because when you're saying that, so Vermeer's wall, blues, yellows, in Argentina, I loved my cement wall because I watched how they make it, and I'm like sitting there fascinated. A pile of sand and cement, and and those particles, you get really close to the wall, and it's like there's cool particles and there's warm particles, but when you stand back, it's like this perfect. I could never get how perfect it was, because it was, it was organic. It's not like this room; it's a painted gray wall.
Yeah.
But my studio in Argentina is a cement wall, and it had the sand and the cement.
That's interesting.
And so I'd go up close and you'd see those warm particles and the cool particles. And so it's that exact color notes that you're talking about that Vermeer used.
Isn't that interesting? Well, I would think that a lot of things in nature present themselves that way. Cellular structures and all that. That the composite color we see changes when you magnify that and all that to be able to see things. Like I think of bugs. Have you ever seen these electron microscopic, blown up and all that, and how fascinating
like
the
bed
colors.
That's so disgusting.
Yeah, but they're just their eyes and the variations in there and all that. But in its totality, when you pull back out, it doesn't have it. But yeah, you're right. That composition.
Yeah.
I think it's snow. That's why snow. I think it's probably part of why I like snow, because snow has that powdery kind of
it refracts
fluff
back.
and does that. Yeah, does
It's
that.
similar to, we're probably getting close to, but it's similar to butterflies, and they don't have pigment in some of their wings,
Right.
but it's the way the light is bounced back to your eye, it produces that blue. Or birds. So on one angle it looks, not so colorful, but then the other angle is super intense,
exactly.
more intense than any pigment can be.
That's like our eyes. Our iris is the same kind of way, that they actually they have that scattered light that you see different colors of people's eyes and all that. And
Fascinating.
babies start off with blue eyes. So are we going to?
So we're getting close to wrapping it up. If Rick, if you want to just mention anything, if not, I'll just kind of close it out.
The one thing I was hoping, I kind of concentrated on this whole thing in the mass. I was hoping that maybe some of these other appendages, that's where it needs. I didn't even put anything in there. I was thinking that when I started, I liked the slash. There was a certain way that it was composed that I liked the streak, and I was hoping that would happen. I'll have to revisit this.
Maybe someday you could work from the image that they have, and you could say how you would use it.
That might be a really good way to do that.
Because it was fresh last night. So,
and that would be interesting to see. That's a good way, maybe, and that's very good.
Okay.
Yeah, because they do change like that. So that's one thing that I definitely changed here. I didn't get this completely as dark as I wanted to get that yet. Because I spent more time on this, but I'm satisfied with what I got as far as the arrangement of things. But I think the biggest point would be that I didn't complete. If I wanted to finish and put these, what was that flower again there? The things around the outside there, the flowers and all. It just has this mass in the center, and I didn't get out. But that was intentional, because I think part of that whole flower array is the arabesque, and that's what I'm seeing. And I didn't even get that. So, but that might be a good way to finish it. I stayed more towards the center.
That's great. Well, tomorrow you got another chance at the white one. That's really beautiful.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Great. Well, I want to just thank everyone for tuning in, if you tuned in live, and thanks for the questions. And we will join up tomorrow at the same time, same place. We'll send an email in the morning, and we just look forward to seeing you. So, talk to you tomorrow.